Lord of Industrialization. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 201 Assassination. After arranging the digging of canals and building of dikes in the marshes, Frederick seemed reluctant to leave Amstel. He rented the most luxurious mansion in the city, spending his days incessantly. He first visited the university in Amstel, which had over 200 students and taught history, medicine, philosophy, and theology. Seeing the library's Spartan architecture and limited collection, he immediately donated 2,000 florins specifically for the construction and expansion of a new library. This library propelled the university to rapid growth, eventually becoming one of the leading institutions on the North Sea coast. That same evening, at a dinner party, Frederick heard a shipping merchant complain about the inconvenience of having a new lighthouse at the estuary, which had collapsed due to disrepair. He immediately offered to donate 400 florins to build a taller and more sturdy one, and asked for paper and pen to draw a conceptual diagram of a Fresnel lens on the spot. This lighthouse later became a local landmark, appearing on the back of banknotes during the paper currency era. Many years later, through the efforts of numerous scholars and craftsmen, the Fresnel lens was finally manufactured. The next day, an organization called the Zoological Society approached the Duke of Wesson. Its 3 leaders hoped the Duke would invest in a park with animals for public viewing. Frederick immediately offered 2 grants and allocated 100 hectares of land west of Wessenberg, allowing them to build 2 identical pavilions. He proposed that the pavilions closely resemble the animals' daily lives. That evening, returning from a ball, he discovered a team of night watchmen patrolling by torchlight in the howling north wind, their torches constantly blowing out. The next day, he approached the city government and announced a donation of 1,000 high-intensity magic lamps for use by night watchmen throughout the Low Countries. A team had already been dispatched to collect the lamps. On the 3rd day, Frederick made a big announcement. He reached an agreement with the bishops of the Low Countries to donate a reading room to each church, open to the public. On the 4th day, Frederick approached the tax authorities, offering them 10 calculators, and giving them one for their own use as a pre-order, stating that this one would not be included in the total. That morning, after Frederick got up and Artisha helped him get dressed, Tony arrived, and Artisha immediately left the bedroom. "How's things going over there?" Frederick asked from his chair. Tony replied, "Commander, Vice Minister Helmut called and said all units have been deployed according to the previously reported plan. They are currently constructing fortifications at key intersections, in cooperation with Baron Wiesen and other local lords. Black Cat has crossed the Elbe River and is conducting reconnaissance eastward." Frederick nodded. "Everything should proceed according to plan. The wireless communication equipment, after a relay, could establish contact with the front within an hour, ensuring that he would not lose control of his troops if he became separated from the main force." Frederick picked up his wooden shoes and put them on. These wooden shoes were a local specialty, carved from a single piece of wood, sturdy and waterproof. He had custom-made a pair to appear similar to the locals. "What about the city?" he asked again. "What's the latest buzz among the gentlemen and citizens?" Tony hesitated, then said, "Many people think the commander is a fool. Only some merchants who have been to Wesson believe you're about to perform another miracle. There's also a rumor that someone might be trying to harm the commander, perhaps pirates from the North Sea." Frederick smiled, walked to the window, and drew back the curtains, revealing a view of the sea. "People laugh at me for being crazy, but I don't laugh at them. After all, they have their limitations. There's no need to be too demanding of everyone." He spoke with confidence, unfazed by the rumors. Amstel hadn't previously had his legend, so his actions didn't carry the same aura as they did in Wesson, where people watched his every move with suspicion. He didn't care. Next year, he would give the entire Low Countries a little Wesson shock. Seeing the commander wasn't worried about the pirates, Tony kept quiet and asked, "Aren't you worried they'll take over all that land?" Frederick, gazing out the window at the turbulent sea, calmly asked Tony, "How do you think we can conquer a region with the least effort?" Tony scratched his head and tentatively replied, "Ask Master Richardnell, Frederick smiled and said, "He'll be busier than the village donkey." Tony thought for a moment, then shook his head. Such a matter was too far from his reach. Frederick's lips curled slightly, and he said, "Don't talk about that. Let's go. We're leaving tomorrow, and we have a lot to do today." Tony quickly shut his mouth, wondering if the commander's current spending spree was related to his future conquests. In the dining room, Françoise had prepared breakfast. Seeing Frederick approach, she happily said, "I've made those croissants you mentioned." Frederick spotted a few croissants on the table. They looked presentable, and as for the taste, Psyche had already eaten half of one. It was pretty good. Françoise asked Frederick, "Where are you going today?" Frederick sat down and replied, "I'm going to the church orphanage this morning, and I have to pack up this afternoon." Françoise appeared calm as she placed breakfast in front of Frederick and said, "Take a look and see if it tastes good. If it does, I'll make you some more later." Frederick smiled and nodded. Someone came over and whispered something in his ear. He narrowed his eyes slightly, whispered something to the person, and then went about his business. After breakfast, Frederick set off with Tony and a box of gold coins. He left Dawn behind, riding a rented horse instead. Frederick placed a box on the rack behind the saddle and tied it securely. As they crossed a bridge, a dozen men suddenly emerged from the water. Most attacked Tony, while a few charged at Frederick, shouting and yelling. One man approached stealthily from behind, and 20 or 30 more who looked like civilians rushed from both sides of the bridge, weapons drawn. The bridge was not far from the city center, and the pedestrians were frequent. The sudden attack threw people into panic, causing chaos. Frederick glanced over and saw no sign of panic. He also saw Tony calmly donning a gas mask, which left him speechless. The main force had arrived to transfer ships when the burning of the marshes around Amstel had occurred, shrouding the city in smog, and the entire army was wearing gas masks. This seemed to confirm the rumor that Duke Wessen's troops were actually terrifying demons who sometimes took human form. Those who lived on the sea believed in gods and demons, but they saw Tony donning a gas mask and briefly thought he was just pretending. However, what happened next gave the pirates a chilling feeling. 2 fists were no match for 4 hands, and Tony, facing the onslaught of these experts, inevitably took a few blows. However, the pirates noticed that their swords, after piercing their clothes, felt like they were striking iron plates, and the recoil nearly knocked them off their feet. Tony's uniform was ripped, revealing the black skin beneath. "Haven't you guys eaten yet?" the man taunted. Tony's bodybuilding martial arts, originally from peach blossom stone, had been brought back by Psyche. It had undergone refinements over the decades, and more recently, Psyche had refined it, and this year began to be adopted by the military. What left Frederick speechless was that this magic, practiced in peach blossom stone, had a name that made him laugh: Iron Shirt. It made sense, considering that practicing this martial art turned one's skin black, just like ordinary iron does after being stored for a long time, so the name made sense. Tony's fists, shrouded in blue light, slammed down on the pirate masters like a battering ram capable of sending tin cans flying, crushing each one. Frederick was too lazy to watch his showmanship. His own enemies were drawing nearer. But he didn't move, and the pirates thought he was stunned. A flash of white shadow passed by. The assassin, never striking a second time, stabbed every pirate who approached Frederick with a slashed throat before vanishing without a trace. The pirates, disguised as ordinary citizens, rushed onto the bridge, only to be surprised when 2 more men leaped from the river. A tall, muscular, and heavily tattooed barbarian brother leaped in front of Frederick and roared at the enemy before him. The soul-piercing roar filled the pirates with unprecedented fear. The pirates paused for a moment, as if their internet connection had stalled. In that same moment, the barbarian brother charged forward with a broadsword as thick as a door panel, slicing through the scene like slicing a watermelon. Behind Frederick, a silver-haired woman in a maroon dress, dark red cape, and hood swung her scythe, sweeping down the pirates who had rushed onto the bridge from behind. The pirates in the lead were wounded, and blood-red light emanated from their wounds, only to be absorbed completely by the scythe. The pirates were dead, and Frederick found himself suddenly more alert. The pirates following him turned and ran, but arrows fired from a distance pinned them to the ground, dissipating into magical elements moments later. In a matter of moments, the pirates were completely annihilated by the elemental puppets summoned by Tony and Frederick, leaving only corpses and a bloody atmosphere. In a room not far from the bridge, Two men watched the events unfolding on the bridge from behind curtains, observing every detail. His guards are very powerful, one of them said in Veneti, the Piast language. He waited for his companion to respond, but they didn't. Suddenly, he saw Duke Wesson turn his head and look in his direction, a mocking smile on his face. He felt an unpredictable pain in his neck, and blood instantly rushed to his lungs, a suffocating feeling filling his mind. By the time the two bodies were discovered by the landlord, Frederick had already sailed away, arriving in Hammer. Chapter 202, No More Slacking. Hammer was a large city straddling the eastern and western banks of the Elbe estuary, connecting the inland with the North Sea. To the north lay the Simplica Peninsula, which stretched into the North Sea. Commerce and crafts flourished. During the fall of the Second Pleistocene Empire, the imperial family retreated, ultimately securing the city. They established a confederation of the Rhine, bounded by the Middle and Lower Elbe and the Saale River. Only the eastern part of Hammer remained on the eastern bank. Frederick arrived in Hammer in late September and settled into his newly purchased mansion in the western part. The mansion had previously belonged to a maritime merchant with a passion for astronomy, who had built an observatory tower in the courtyard. However, his fleet had recently been decimated by a storm, leaving him penniless and forced to sell the mansion and return home to a more idyllic life. Frederick's particular attraction lay in the observatory tower, now used as a site for wireless communications equipment. His first act upon arrival was to send a long letter to the city of Weissenberg. As soon as he had settled in, the guests arrived. Wow! How luxurious! The Grand Duke of Bane's expression was exaggerated as he carefully touched the gilded leather sofa. The mansion's original owner was a nouveau riche who'd gotten lucky selling several trendy items, so naturally, his tastes were as high-end and classy as they could be. The Grand Duke of Bane wasn't ignorant. His own palace was far more luxurious than this one, but he had a different agenda. Then, with a frown, he said, "But I always feel like something's missing." Meanwhile, the Grand Duke of Mainz, clutching his head in his hands, angrily said, "Oh, I seem to have this compulsion to tell Maria every rumor I hear." Frederick was bewildered, puzzled by the two old men's intrigue. Then, the Grand Duke of Bane said solemnly, "Such a beautiful house, it would be a shame if it weren't filled with 10 or 8 beautiful women." The Grand Duke of Mainz continued, "Oh, my head hurts." Frederick understood. Rumors from Amstel must have reached him. At this time, he could not follow their lead, so Frederick said to the Grand Duke of Bane, "Then I will accept your suggestion and hold an open audition for 10 or 8 beautiful girls tomorrow." The two old men looked at each other, and the Grand Duke of Bane shook his head and said, "Young people nowadays are not subtle." When he was looking for a lover for the first time, he hid in Minxing City and often ran to my side in disguise. At that time, my grandfather thought they were going to attack us and sent him to spy on military intelligence. The Grand Duke of Mainz glared at him fiercely, and ignored him. His headache was gone, and he asked Frederick, "How many girls in Amstel have you given shell necklaces to? Tell me the truth, so that I can help you fool Maria when she mentions it in the future." Frederick was stunned and asked in confusion, "What shell necklace? You don't know?" The Grand Duke of Mainz was also very surprised. In this area along the North Sea coast, young people show their love by giving shells. If you personally put a shell necklace on the other person, it means that the other person is yours. Frederick blinked and a cold sweat broke out. The Grand Duke of Bane immediately understood what was going on. He laughed for half a minute, then said with a look of gloating delight, "It seems you foolishly put a necklace on some girl. Now we're going to have some fun." The Grand Duke of Mainz suddenly said seriously, "It's normal for you to find a lover, but be careful not to bring a wolf into your house." Frederick frowned and decided to change the subject. "Have you heard about the assassination attempt on me in Amstel?" The Grand Duke of Bane said, "Otherwise, why do you think we came to you in such a hurry today?" The Grand Duke of Mainz asked, "Do you know who did it?" Frederick nodded and said, "Someone tipped me off. Those pirates are connected to the Piast Kingdom." The two Grand Dukes' expressions grew solemn. The assassination of Frederick by the Piast Kingdom, 300 kilometers away, meant either a personal vendetta against a high-ranking official or some grand conspiracy. Frederick was certain he hadn't offended anyone in the Piast Kingdom, so a conspiracy was the order. The Archduke of Mainz gestured, and his attendant pulled a map from his bag, spread it out on the living room table, and then laid out various chess pieces. This map covered the area east of the Elbe River to the central Piast Kingdom. The southern portion encompassed part of the northern part of the Osmagian Empire, encompassing the entire Bohemian region. While crude, the map clearly marked the mountains, rivers, and cities. Currently, the Rhine Confederation's forces were deployed in a long, serpentine formation along the border river. Frederick saw no strategic depth, simply a silent obstruction. In Bohemia, 500 kilometers southeast of Hammer, in a basin stretching over 200 kilometers from east to west and 100 kilometers from north to south, the Osmagian Empire's 120,000-man army was in the south, while the Piast Kingdom's 80,000-man army was in the north, facing off. The main force of the Piast army was stationed in a mountain pass about 30 kilometers long in the northern mountains. If this pass were breached, the rear would be completely flat and defenseless. A 60,000-man coalition of loosely organized nobles east of the Elbe River, under the command of the Osmagian Empire, is gathering outside the city of Bulling, 260 kilometers southeast of Hammer. Approximately 80 kilometers east lies the Oder River, the border of the Piast Kingdom. If necessary, they could advance eastward into Piast territory, or southeastward, joining the main force of the Osmagian Empire in attacking the Piast forces in northern Bohemia from both the north and the south. To the west of the Piast Kingdom, an army is gathering to counter this noble coalition, but its size and composition are unknown. Overall, the Osmagian Empire appears to be more powerful, maintaining the initiative on both the north and south fronts, leaving the Piast Kingdom on the defensive. After hearing the introduction, Frederick asked, "Is the troop size realistic?" Grand Duke Bane, whose territory bordered the Osmag Empire, replied, "The Osmag Empire often forced a conscription of troops, so it was able to organize a fairly large army. In contrast, the lords of the Piast Kingdom are less likely to obey the king's orders. So even though they have many planes and a large population, they can't form a large army. However, I heard that they have recently been very close to the people on the easternmost coast of the North Sea, and it is very likely that they have formed an alliance. Perhaps the people there will send a large number of reinforcements. The same is true of the Danma Kingdom on the Simbrica Peninsula. They seem to be seeking an alliance between the southern and eastern coasts of the North Sea," Grand Duke Mainz said to Frederick. Currently, the Piast Kingdom's central army is commanded by Crown Prince Casimir. He is 18 years old this year. Like you, he has been on the battlefield against the Ant people in the east at such a young age, and his winning rate is not low. The Osmag Empire's army is commanded by Grand Duke Hicks, a well-known commander of our generation. Then he pointed at the Grand Duke of Bavaria and said, "Grand Duke Hicks nearly beat him to death once." The Grand Duke of Bavaria smiled wryly and nodded. Frederick studied the troop deployments on the map and pondered, realizing that this time he might not be able to slack off. Those 60,000 men outside of Berlin may be doomed, Frederick suddenly declared. Their purpose is to serve as a deadly spearhead, distracting the Piast Kingdom's attention and manpower. I'm afraid they haven't considered how to defend themselves. Meanwhile, in a Piast military camp over 400 kilometers east of Hammer, a young man under 20 spoke to a group of noble generals in front of a map, saying, "We will form the northern army with 100,000 men, and draw 60,000 from the 80,000 men in northern Bohemia to form the southern army. On the same day, we will attack the area between the Oder and Elbe rivers." In Hammer, Frederick continued, "Right now, all the eastern forces are concentrated outside of Berlin. Once they are eliminated, the Piast army will be unstoppable in this area. Elsewhere," Casimir pointed to the map, "first north and then south. After the northern army eliminates the main enemy force outside Berlin, they will advance westward without resistance, sending some men to occupy the northern coastal areas. The southern army will quickly capture various areas, primarily Linden City, while the remaining troops will march north to reunite with the northern army." Frederick pointed to his own defense zone on the map and said, "The Piast Kingdom wouldn't attack me without cause. Their goal is most likely to open a gap here and cross the Elbe River. The only target worth their while is Hammer." Casimir tapped Wesson on the map and said, "The northern army crossed the river from Wesson. Duke Wesson was assassinated in Amstel a few days ago and fled the next day in terror. He'll undoubtedly be terrified by the arrival of the army and need not be feared. After crossing the river, the entire army will not stop but will quickly march north to encircle Hammer from the west." Frederick drew a circle outside the northern part of the map and said, "They're working so hard to capture Hammer because there must be huge benefits. For example, the Kingdom of Danma on the Simbrica Peninsula to the north. Hammer is enough for them to assist the Piast Kingdom in its fight against the Osmaga Empire." Casimir pointed at Hammer City and said, "After we surround Hammer City from the west, the army of the Kingdom of Danma will move south, surround the eastern part of Hamma City, and occupy the surrounding areas. This is a prerequisite for our alliance." Frederick folded his hands over his chest and said with a sneer, "The Piast Kingdom made a brilliant move, but the margin of error is too low. We must cooperate with the Osmaga Empire." Casimir slammed his fist on the map, looked around at the generals, and said decisively, "The Rhine Alliance can only mobilize 8,000 troops around Hamma City. We and the Kingdom of Danma have a total of 160,000 troops, 160,000 against 8,000. The advantage is on our side." Frederick looked at the map and said lightly, "Since they are here, there is no need to go back. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 203, Dealing with Possible Enemies. The Archdukes of Mainz and Bavaria, two veterans of intrigue and conspiracy, saw some truth in Frederick's analysis, otherwise, it couldn't explain his unprovoked assassination. Caution was crucial on the battlefield, and after a brief discussion, the three decided to prepare early. It's better to lament the wasted effort later than to regret not preparing when the stakes are high. The king's reckless actions proved problematic. The entire Elba defense line of the Rhine Confederation lacked a unified command structure, and everyone had to focus on their own areas. Standing firm in times of trouble was their duty, and rushing to the aid of allies from afar was a matter of courtesy. They could only do their part in this matter, and others could only offer reminders. Whether they follow the will of the God of Light remained to be determined. After sending the two leaders away, Frederick thought for a moment and immediately sent a telegram back to Wissenberg, requesting the dismantling and packaging of the triple-barreled P guns atop several city walls, along with a large quantity of ammunition. There were now two routes from Wissenberg to Hammer. One route, the main troop route, involved sailing up the main river and then the Rhine, transferring to a sea vessel in Amstel for Hammer, a journey of over 1,500 kilometers. The other, a recently opened trade route, involved carriages entering the Duchy of Franconia from the north of Nuremberg, then arriving at a small mountain town. From there, they boarded a ship and sailed down the river to Hammer, a distance of approximately 700 kilometers, half the distance of the previous route. The lords of the route from Nuremberg to the mountain town had previously seen little profit, but now, reaping a bounty from customs taxes, they bought mansions in Nuremberg and indulged in luxury. But this was only the first hurdle. The rivers along the way were riddled with checkpoints, and many territories had laws forcing merchants to sell a tenth of their goods. The staff in Wessenberg calculated that the shorter route would require frequent stops and starts, while the longer route would allow for full acceleration, requiring only a single ship change in Amstel. Heavy rains had recently fallen in the upper reaches, buoying the river's flow and surging currents. A fleet sailing downstream could cover nearly 100 to 200 kilometers non-stop, allowing the cargo to reach Hammer in about 10 days. Frederick pondered the plan sent by his general staff for half an hour. Besides the plan for transporting supplies, they also suggested increasing the number of troops, drawing from the city's garrison to bolster the regular army, and recruiting new soldiers from the autumn draft. Sending 2 regiments to reinforce the territory behind Hammer would be sufficient. Ultimately, he rejected the plan and ordered the 2 regiments to be deployed near the borders of the Duchy of Franconia to the north and the League of Legends to the east. While examining the map, he had a hunch that after the Piast Kingdom captured Hammer, they would likely advance south along the Elbe River, skirting the mountains surrounding Bohemia from the west, and blocking the main force of the Osmagorian Empire. In those days, such a large-scale maneuver would require logistical support through looting, and the Western region happened to be located near the route. At this time, Helmut rushed back from the front and reported the latest situation to Frederick. The Western army had built 30 small wooden forts along the river, each with a small team. If they spotted the enemy crossing the river, they would immediately report and retreat, while the main force deployed in the second line would counterattack the enemy as needed. Frederick nodded and said, "Well done. Now here's a question. What are your plans if tens of thousands of enemies cross the river from our defense zone and go around to the west of Hammer?" Helmut thought the commander was testing him, so he said, "The surrounding area is plains. The only things that can hinder the enemy's movement are the rivers and forests. There are 3 ferries in our defense zone that can accommodate large-scale river crossings, but no matter where we cross the river, there is only one place we can camp that night. There is a pasture there with water, grass, and cattle to provide supplies for so many people. We can launch a night attack and eventually defeat the enemy." Frederick did not nod, but continued, "We have a history of night attacks during the Six-Day War." "What if the enemy takes precautions?" Helmut replied. "The enemy will have people taking turns on night shifts, and a night attack will buy time for others. As long as our attack is swift and fierce, and doesn't give the enemy enough time to prepare, it will be fine." Frederick nodded and gave a serious order. You are to quickly formulate a plan based on annihilation warfare. The enemy's number is initially estimated to be between 50,000 and 60,000. Helmut's eyes lit up, and he saluted excitedly. Frederick asked him to sit down, then asked, "Your hometown is across the river, right? Have you been back?" Helmut replied, "My family is in the kingdom of Danmar. I'd like to write home and ask my parents and brother to come over." Frederick smiled, saying he wanted to, but in reality, he was asking for his approval. If he didn't, he wouldn't bother. "Hurry up and write," Frederick said. "They can go to Wesson. If they don't want to go, you can help me manage this mansion and other properties in Hammer." He was currently in Hammer, but there were many properties owned by Danmar merchants in the city. If the Danmar kingdom really attacked Hammer, their properties would surely be confiscated, and then everyone would sit down together and share the spoils. Helmut happily left. By then, it was dark, and it was time to prepare for dinner. A guest had arrived at tea time, but Frederick, busy with military duties, couldn't meet him, so he invited him to dinner. To the north of Hammer lies the ocean, surrounded by plains. The city boasts abundant resources and a wide variety of food. At the dinner table, Frederick smiled and said to Baron Addison, "Hammer's seafood is famous in the south, but I've heard that those who make a living on the sea eat what they catch daily, and land-based food is rarely available to them. So, today, I'm treating you to roast veal." Addison had originally been unconcerned about what to eat for dinner, but he was momentarily touched by Duke Wesson's consideration. Frederick studied Addison closely. He was about 30 years old, a burly man with a combined military rigor and integrity, and the ferocity and viciousness of the pirates of Haywarden. Raising his glass, Frederick said, "Tradition, thank you for tipping off the other day in Amstel. Otherwise I would have been in big trouble." Addition replied, "This is what I should do. I am very happy to hear that you are safe and sound." Frederick did not ask him where the news came from, but asked, "Is there any progress on your fleet?" Addition replied, "I have ordered 5 three-masted sailing ships from the shipyard. It will take 2 years to complete. The down payment was borrowed money. The money you used to buy a house and the investment will be used as capital to sell goods." Frederick asked him curiously how much money he had earned, but he became withdrawn after getting the answer. Chapter 204 Business at Sea. Frederick knew that maritime trade was profitable. One look at this house proved it. But he didn't know exactly how much, so he needed to inquire with a professional. Addition calmly told him, "Thank you for your generosity, my lord. I used 40,000 florins worth of vouchers to purchase dehydrated fruits and vegetables and condensed soup in Wissenberg. I hired a ship to transport them to the dark lands of the north in exchange for iron ore. The iron ore is being exchanged for a ship in Amstel, and when it's sold in Wissenberg, the final profit will be 400,000 florins. Half of this profit belongs to you, my lord." Frederick instantly withered. The Wiesen family would have needed to farm for 800 years to earn what he could make in less than a month on this trip. The gold that Psyche had picked up from the vaults of the Royal Library in Constantia was barely enough for 70% of this profit. He had recently made a fortune. To escape, Duke Haga donated his property in Cologne to the church, and the church split it 50-50 with him, which translated to just 90%. Addition could see he was depressed, so he said, "This business trip is not representative, and it contains a lot of coincidences. I was able to make this deal because, first of all, Your Excellency generously provided a huge amount of capital, and secondly, I saved several nobles from the midnight region of the Dark Land at sea before, so I can do business directly with them." Maritime trade has its own rules. First, merchants must purchase a trade license from the local lord before they can trade in the port. If they are affiliated with a chamber of commerce with a license, they need to pay a high commission. Chambers of commerce that can provide affiliation services are often run by the lord himself, and other chambers of commerce do not have such power. This practice was originally intended to put an end to pirate trade at sea, preventing pirates from selling stolen goods. In the end, it became a channel for lords and pirates to trade. Secondly, Whether a territory accepts merchants from another place depends on the political environment. If the two regions are hostile, the Lord will deprive the merchants of this region of their trading rights. In the dark land in the north, the coastal cities in the south are okay and are willing to accept pagan merchants like us. But the further north you go, the less friendly it is, and very few of us can do business there. Another very important point is that different seas have different conditions, and not every captain is familiar with every wave. Therefore, ships have specific routes, and long-distance transportation requires multiple changes of ship. I was lucky this time. I met an older captain who could lead the fleet north against the wind, sailing almost full sail all the way directly from Amstel City to the destination. If it were anyone else, they would only be able to sell the dehydrated vegetables purchased from Wessenland State to merchants south of the Dark Land. Because there are so many people selling them, the profit is not high. Iron ore is also several times more expensive than its place of origin due to the layers of markups. Generally speaking, the profit for each voyage is 2 to 3 times. Routes that exceed 5 times are called golden routes. However, due to the influx of newcomers, such routes have a lifespan of only 6 months, no more than 2 years. Speaking of the cost, few people dare to risk everything on a business like I did. The risks at sea are huge. Harsh weather, unpredictable monsters, and ferocious pirates can all make a fleet disappear without a trace. That's why merchants diversify their investments, investing a large portion in safe but low-profit routes. They won't risk the majority of their fortunes on such a risky venture. If they fail, the former owner of this house will be a role model. I can still make one more trip like this year. The northern coast will soon freeze over. He spoke as he ate. By the time he finished, he had already devoured most of a veal hind leg and looked still not full. Judging by his appetite alone, a Dickon was an expert. Frederick took a sip of beer from his glass, thought for a moment, and asked, "If we invest all 400,000 florins this time, can we make 4 million? Addison smiled bitterly and shook his head, replying, "No, because the size of an ocean-going fleet is limited. Too many ships will make it impossible to effectively command them, and some ships will not be able to keep up with the old captain and will fall behind. No captain would want to join such a fleet. Next trip I will import 100,000 florins of goods. That's the limit. We may not have that much iron ore this time. I've ordered furs and ice magic crystals. If they don't prepare enough, maybe some dried venison and dried fish. The rest of the money can only be deposited in the bank. I will look for companions to join this winter." Frederick nodded, thought for a moment, and asked again, "If ships can communicate with each other at a distance of 2 or 3 kilometers, can we form a large enough fleet?" Addison shook his head slightly and said, "That's not a problem. The key is to determine the location. If a ship is lost and we don't know where the fleet is, we won't be able to catch up." Frederick fell into deep thought, and after a moment he asked solemnly, "Baron Addison, are you interested in managing the Wesson family's fleet? He has some new technologies that can be used on ships, but some can only be used on his own people." Addison was stunned, then replied, "I'm very sorry, my ambition is not to become a maritime merchant, but to eliminate pirates." Frederick raised his eyebrows. The Navy is more difficult to deal with than maritime merchants, so he said, "I have some new weapons that can be used on ships, and I want to cooperate with you." Addison thought for a while and asked, "Are you interested in getting involved in maritime business?" Frederick nodded and said, "Yes, but not now. I met a girl of the same age as me in Amstel. Her ambition is to do business in every port in the world. I want to hire you to teach her." After he finished speaking, he saw that the corners of Addison's mouth twitched slightly. After Addison's mouth twitched, he immediately replied, "That's no problem, but life at sea is very hard. If she can't stand it, I can't do anything." Frederick nodded, and said, "There is a professor at the University of Wiesenberg who is studying some equipment for ships. I would like to ask you to take him to the sea and let him know what life is like at sea." Professor Heinrich was once a member of the Royal Magic Corps and is quite powerful. Addison was surprised. "Why does he want to tinker with things on the ship?" Frederick asked curiously. "Do you know him?" Addison nodded and replied, "He and my father are friends, so it's okay to take him with you." Frederick continued to ask him, "I want to select people from the territory to train a group of sailors. I wonder if you can help." Addison hesitated, and said cautiously, "Sir, I have ordered 5 three-masted sailing ships with a hull of 500 florins, and with weapons, it will cost a total of 900 florins, but this money is nothing compared to the salary." An ordinary sailor at sea earns 11 to 15 florins a year, an excellent sailor 30 to 35 florins a year, an elite sailor 60 florins a year, an ordinary seaman 40 florins a year, an excellent seaman 80 florins a year, an elite seaman and captains at least 150 florins a year, plus commissions. There's a reason their salaries are so high. Seasickness can be fatal at any time, and more importantly, seasickness. Many men are strong on land, but as soft as slime at sea. Frederick said, I understand what you mean. You're worried about the men I send getting seasick, Addition conceded. Frederick pondered, that's a problem, but I'll try to solve it. When are you leaving? Addition, unsure of what he was going to try, replied, I'm returning to Amstel by ship tomorrow. Frederick thought for a moment and said, come see me before you leave tomorrow and bring me a letter. Wireless communication cannot transmit the blueprints yet, so I can only ask him to bring the letter. When preparing to say goodbye, Attican seemed to suddenly remember something and whispered, my lord, I heard that Shupaya, the president of the Guild Alliance, is seeking the position of Minister of Commerce in your territory. He plans to organize a group of sea merchants to invest in Wesson State. Frederick narrowed his eyes slightly, just smiled, and thanked him for bringing the news. Chapter 205, Strategies to Defend Against the Enemy. The dark clouds of war had already gathered over Hanma City, but the city went on drinking and dancing. The first rumble of thunder from the clouds came from three men who looked like beggars. A middle-aged couple, accompanied by a teenage child, arrived at the city gates. Their clothes were tattered and dirty, and the dirt on their faces and hands was not freshly applied. They looked exhausted, and the guards at the gate wanted to stop them, but the middle-aged man pulled a letter from his pocket, and the three were quickly escorted to the Duke of Wesson's residence. Frederick had gone to Shupaya's house for a reception. Shupaya had just introduced him to Bachner, the shipyard owner, and before he could introduce the other wealthy merchants, someone came up and whispered something in his ear. I understand. Frederick's face darkened, causing Shupaya and the others to shudder. I have urgent business to attend to, he said, giving everyone a sense of unease. Please make yourselves. With that, Frederick turned and left without hesitation, leaving the group staring at each other in bewilderment. In the living room, Helmut, having returned on horseback, met his parents and younger brother, then listened attentively to the latest intelligence his father had brought him. Helmut's family was a down-and-out noble family, still able to make ends meet, so his father earned money as a low-ranking military officer in the Kingdom of Danmar. Upon receiving his son's letter, he initially treated it as nothing, then quietly absconded with the family while attending church on the last Sunday of September. Their belongings remained untouched, and in the cupboards were sausages and olive oil, freshly bought the day before. They brought news that shocked Frederick and Helmut. Danmar had assembled an army of 60,000 men. While more than half of the Danmar army consisted of conscripted peasants, the bulk of the force consisted of 10,000 regular troops assembled by various lords and 15,000 mercenaries hired from the Dark Lands. The regular army in Hanmer City consisted of 3,500 men from the upstream cooperative and 2,000 from the Hanmer City Defense Force. Shipowners could gather several thousand soldiers aboard their ships, with over 10,000 capable sailors. There are two more pieces of news. Frederick relayed the latest intelligence to the Grand Duke of Mainz and the Grand Duke of Bane. The first is that there are spies from the Kingdom of Danmar in the city, and they will try to seize Chengmen. The second is that the Kingdom of Piast will simultaneously surround the West City to disperse our combat effectiveness. After listening to this, the Grand Duke of Mainz raised his right hand and wanted to slam the armrest of the sofa to vent his anger. Frederick hurriedly said, don't smash it. This is a 200-year-old antique sofa. The Grand Duke of Bane smiled and said, it's okay, let him smash it. He has a set of sofas at home that were given by the royal family of the Second Purian Empire. They are almost 400 years old. If he breaks them, ask your fiancé to move it home. Frederick immediately said, okay, smash it. The Grand Duke of Mainz glared at the Grand Duke of Bane fiercely, put his hand gently back on his thigh, and said angrily, it is impossible for the Kingdom of Danmar to gather so many troops without leaking the news in advance, but there is no news in the city. Someone in the upper echelons must be colluding with the Kingdom of Danmar. Like Nuremberg and Wesson, Hammer was a free city. As long as taxes were paid, the higher authorities took no action. The mayor, judges, and other officials were elected by the citizens, effectively rotating among several major families. For these high-ranking families, it didn't matter who they pay taxes to, it all came down to which side contributed the most. Clearly, the Kingdom of Danmar was currently paying more. These veterans had experienced similar situations and had engaged in numerous schemes. They didn't need hard evidence, they could tell by the smell of the enemy. Frederick had intimidated the city by the sheer force of victory at the 6 days' defense and the confiscation of the property of all those in Nuremberg who had contributed to the hiring of the mercenaries, stripping their families of all ages and genders down to their underwear. In Hammer, he held little influence. The same was true for the two archdukes. They were foreign troops, unable to integrate into the system of power. Even eliminating the entire upper echelon of Hammer would be futile unless the Elbe River was completely blocked. We can only rely on ourselves, the Grand Duke of Bane said in a deep voice. We can call Count Delden to discuss it together. The Grand Duke of Mainz nodded. Frederick also agreed. He had some friendship with Mrs. Delden and had even sent a batch of revolvers, so he could speak with some influence. Moreover, Count Delden was the deputy commander of the Royal Knights. In addition to his vassals, he also brought the knights under his control. He was also very powerful among the nobles. Now, like other nobles who came to garrison the Elbe River, he thought that this was a fishing trip and everyone was having a good time in the city. Count Delden arrived soon. He had just woken up and thought that Duke Wesson was inviting him to dinner and drinks, but he was shocked by the latest military intelligence. Ask for help, he said in a deep voice. The four of us will write a joint letter to the king, asking him to send the royal magician Kaur. Frederick and the other three had the same idea just now, so they naturally agreed. Count Delden then asked, how do you plan to fight? Grand Duke Bane pointed at Frederick and said with a smile, listen to this kid's trick. My son might even throw a 3-day, 3-night banquet to celebrate. Frederick sneered and then laid out his plan. Count Delden frowned and asked, do you really have a grudge against them? Frederick smiled but remained silent. Grand Duke Bane said, jokes aside, don't underestimate us. As long as you follow your plan, we'll be fine. Seeing this, Count Delden could only say, well, I hope you can hold out. The four men discussed the details and then went about their respective tasks. Over the next few days, a number of events unfolded in Hammer. The next evening, while Count Delden was attending a ball, a knight of the Royal Order and another knight got into an argument. Seeing the two men arguing increasingly heatedly, on the verge of a fight, Count Delden stepped forward to dissuade them, saying, you both seem to have too much free time. How about this? I'm hosting a knight's tournament in my garrison in 10 days. I'll let you two fight in the first round, okay? Yes, yes, Frederick immediately chimed in excitedly. I'll pay the prize money. First place gets 1,000 florins. Second place 600 florins. Third and fourth place 400 and 300 florins, respectively. Reaching the quarterfinals gets 200 florins, and reaching the round of 16 gets 100 florins. Winning any match will earn you an extra 50 florins. With few group entertainment activities these days, knights tournaments were very popular, and the generous prize money tempted many. For the strongest, 1,000 florins was a considerable income, and even more important was the honor of first place. Even less skilled knights were tempted by the 50 florin prize. Winning 2 matches would be equivalent to almost a year's income. The people of Hammer suddenly noticed that the number of foreign nobles attending the reception and dance had dropped by more than half from the second day. By the third day, they had all fled to Count Delden's defenses, including many locals who prided themselves on their martial prowess. Meanwhile, several incidents had occurred. The armies of the Grand Dukes of Mainz and Bavaria clashed with the locals over the theft of chickens and ducks from the village. While no one was killed, many farmers were beaten to death. The case reached the higher authorities, and the two Grand Dukes, urging their men to train for a good performance at the conference, impatiently decided to build a winter camp outside Hammer, sending everyone there to wait out the winter. The location was not far from Hammer, perched on 2 small hills about 500 meters outside the East City Gate. After much discussion within the Hammer hierarchy, they realized that, with only about 3,000 to 4,000 men, including the civilians, it would be difficult to build a strong fortress in a short time, so they agreed. Then, Frederick took the stage, igniting his civil engineering spirit and demonstrating his financial prowess. Chapter 206, Bastion filled with explosives. Hammer had a thriving shipbuilding industry, with numerous shipyards along the Elbe River, boasting an abundance of hydraulic saws, skilled carpenters, and raw materials. With generous sums of gold being poured in, shipbuilding paused for a moment, while a steady stream of planks, carpenters, and nails arrived at the construction site east of the city. Earlier, farmers from surrounding villages, freshly harvesting their oats, arrived with their tools, digging trenches along the lime lines in the ground. Looking down from the air, one could see the trenches forming a shape. In Frederick's hometown, the use of early artillery led to the emergence of bastions, but here, he chose to build them to capitalize on the power of the revolving rifles used by the armies of the Grand Dukes of Mainz in Bavaria. Following Frederick's instructions, the carpenters quickly nailed the formwork together, and the stone merchants arrived. The militiamen from the Wesson army, tasked with building the fort, brought steam engines, mixers, and cement from Wesson. They had originally intended to build a dock for Baron Wesson next year, also advertising it, but now was the perfect time. His bastion design was shaped like each side of the pentagon formed by the bastion's 5 obtuse angles was 120 meters long, providing a usable area of approximately 25,000 square meters, easily enough to accommodate more than 4,000 people and their supplies. The outer wall, 1,942 meters long and modeled after a vertical roadside retaining wall, stood approximately 4.4 meters high above ground and 1.1 meters below ground, 1.4 meters wide at the top and 2.5 meters wide at the bottom. It was crowned by a 1.5 meter high, 0.5 meter thick parapet. Instead of crenels, firing ports were placed every 0.5 meters to allow for kneeling fire, and each corner contained a port for a triple-barreled pea gun. The construction volume was approximately 22,000 cubic meters. A trench, 3 meters deep and 4 meters wide, parallel to the wall, was dug more than 10 meters outside. Excavated earth was piled on this side of the wall into a 2-meter-high right-angled slope. Climbing up from the bottom of the trench required a 5-meter climb, providing ample space for enemy fire from behind. However, due to a shortage of cement, Frederick couldn't construct a pure concrete bastion, so he resorted to using rough stone concrete walls. Time was tight, the task was demanding, and the client was willing to spend money. The surrounding farmers were willing to work during their off-season, and with a provision of 3 meals a day and meat for midnight snacks, the original 3-shift work shift was reduced to 2, and the wall grew at a visible pace. Frederick and a few older men who had worked in the industrial park were the busiest, keeping an eye on the mixers while overseeing the work of the farmers, who could drive them to high blood pressure. Laying the stones was a skillful task, requiring careful attention to the overlapping joints between the stones and the tie stones between different layers. The magicians in charge of the vibrators were also exhausted. A few local magicians skilled in earthquake magic came to observe the work and struck up a conversation. Upon learning that the wages were high and the work was safe, they immediately switched jobs. Some spies and onlookers observed the construction site from a distance for a while, then left with disdain after seeing that the so-called fortress was just stone stuffed into wooden boards. The formwork was removed at night, but the planks were still useful. A wooden platform needed to be built inside the wall, otherwise the less than a meter wide top wouldn't be accessible for standing. Frederick then had large pieces of cloth, wrapped in old sacks and torn sails, hung on the wall and assigned to be watered regularly, beginning the wall's maintenance. The spies, observing the rags and watering, reasoned that the wall consisted of 2 planks with stone between them, perhaps rammed with earth at best. The watering of the cloth was probably a precaution against igniting the planks. Outside the bastion, the Grand Dukes of Bavaria and Mainz had farmers dig trenches, strung with barbed wire between them. They also worried about the enemy using massive trebuchets. "Don't worry," Bruce told the 2 archdukes. "A large trebuchet needs to be 200 meters from the wall to hurl heavy projectiles, which are within reach of rifles. For lighter projectiles, they can reach 500 meters, we have these." After the artisans of the bastion left, Frederick allowed reinforcements and supplies from the territories to enter. This time, the Springfield Arsenal assembled a team, led by Director Bruce, who brought some experimental weapons, and Frederick assigned them to the bastion. Their main weapon was a particular nuisance to Frederick. Its launcher was actually a mortar, using a 100mm jet canister originally intended for a jet cannon. With a 50mm caliber, it could fire cherry cannon grenades when necessary. However, the arsenal had equipped it with several super-caliber shells. These shells had a large head with fins around it for stability, and a steel tail tube at the rear that inserted into the barrel. Holding up a small-headed, long-tailed shell, Bruce said, "This can reach 1,000 meters. Even a magic crystal cannon wouldn't be a problem. Magic crystal cannons, currently limited to 700 to 800 meters in range and large and heavy, were generally used only for defensive purposes, lacking the range of the newer weapons. At this time, Grand Duke Byrne pinched his chin and said to Grand Duke Mines, "Should we get a magic crystal cannon from Hammer City and point it at the gate, so that we can fire a shot in case the gate is breached?" It was the first time that Grand Duke Mines heard of a bayonet on a magic crystal cannon. After thinking about it, he said, "I think it's okay. Let's get a small one, otherwise it will not be good to enlarge the gate." Bruce was convinced by them and pointed to some other boxes and said, "Here are some grenades." The master said that they are too heavy and the distance they are thrown is not much larger than the killing range. They are suitable for defense, so he asked me to bring them. Nowadays, the firepower deficiency syndrome has a tendency to spread in the Springfield arsenal. For example, this experimental grenade is so heavy that even a soldier who has just embarked on the road of extraordinary power can only throw it more than 30 meters, and its killing radius is 30 meters. After opening the box, the Grand Duke of Mines picked up a mine and weighed it. He smiled and said to the Grand Duke of Bane, "Shall we have a competition then?" The Grand Duke of Bane picked up the instruction manual and began to study it. He snorted coldly and said, "I'm afraid you'll throw it out without pulling the string." Wasting a good thing, he turned to Bruce and asked, "What other goodies did you bring?" "Landmines," Bruce said as he walked to the side and opened a box. "There are mines for clearing infantry phalanxes, some for nighttime surprise attacks, and even one specifically for exploding cavalry, specially for exploding cavalry." The two Grand Dukes were a little surprised. Wesson's weapons were so clever? Bruce saw what they were thinking and explained with a smile, "Actually, its fuse is tight. If an ordinary person steps too lightly, it won't explode. It will only explode if the weight of a person and horse is high enough. Heavy infantry will also explode. By the way, if some fool jumps on it, it will explode." The Grand Duke of Bane nodded and said, "That's good. Who came up with this crazy idea?" Bruce scratched his head a little embarrassedly. At this moment, a thought suddenly occurred to him, and he hurriedly said, "These weapons need to be stored separately. It's best to dig pits and store them there. If they get caught in a fire, we're all doomed." This reminder made the two archdukes break out in a cold sweat. They had observed the training of the Wesson army, and they knew that a small cherry cannon grenade was so powerful. And then there were the piles of boxes around them that held the heavy weapons. The two men immediately ordered pits to be dug in the ground and put all the weapons inside. At this time, a Wesson Army soldier came to report that the wireless communication equipment had been installed and debugged. Chapter 207 Talents Cannot Be Let Go. October, Frederick and several of his men attended a team-building event for the Church of Light at the city's church, where they then chatted with a local bishop. Following the angels' arrival in Cologne, the Holy City held a 3-day, 3-night meeting. Afterward, an important internal document was issued, designating Frederick as a key member of the headquarters undercover investigation team. The document mandated that churches, monasteries, and chapels at all levels greet him with respect, making him feel at home. Their requests must be taken seriously and met as best they could. Any requests that could not be met must be reported immediately to higher authorities. The Bishop of Hammer greeted Frederick with a smile as warm as a spring breeze, his heart pumping with confidence. Fortunately, Frederick had simply paid out of his own pocket to have the church send a shipment of grain to the bastion outside the city, under its name. The bishop readily agreed. Although the Hammer granary had caught fire the day before and still smoldered, the church had numerous branches and a robust system, making procuring food from the rear a breeze. After leaving the church, Frederick said to Helmut and Tony, who had joined him today, "Let's walk around the city and see what good food there is." The commander said so, and the two agreed. However, after walking around for a while, they discovered that the most popular delicacy in Hammer was the Wesson bun. Unlike in Wesson State, where the only vegetables between the two buns were sausages, beef patties, pork patties, and chicken patties, here there was an abundance of seafood. There were fish patties, grilled fish fillets, shrimp patties, shellfish patties, and even one with crab roe. The city was full of artisans and dock workers, and it was noon, so the Wesson bun, a convenient and quick food, was very popular. One shop could account for 90% of its total daily sales during breakfast and lunch. These shops were all grab and go, with no dine-in service. Frederick and his friends packed a few bags of seafood and left. Christian, after finishing other errands, arrived in Hammer, and Frederick happened to chat with him over a meal. Frederick said to him while eating, You have to go to Edinburgh in Caledonia, north of Anglia, to look for a scholar named Adam. I don't know his last name, but I know where his hometown is. He visited Wesson for a period of time from last year to the beginning of this year, and published several articles in the economic edition of the Wesson Daily. I don't know if he has returned home. If you see him, you should be as obedient as your grandson and invite him to Wesson to serve as Minister of Commerce with an annual salary of 500 florins. If this matter is done well, you will be a baron like him. After you see him, please tell him a message from me. Instead of observing from the sidelines, it is better to get involved. Practice is the only criterion for testing truth. Christian immediately took the order. Currently, there are no baronies to be passed down through the family line in the canton of Wesson. Earlier this year, the Duke of Wesson announced that on his 16th birthday, he would confer baronships on several knights, including Minister of Administration Frick, Minister of Taxes Neuer, Grand Chancellor Otto, current President of the Football Association, Old Knight Franz, Vice President of the University of Wessenberg Manuel, and Professor Ahmed. Some of these individuals are elders in the family, while others have contributed significantly to the development of the canton, and no one objected. Christian, already a baron during his time with Rudolf, would have lied about wanting another title, but he knew his qualifications and achievements were insufficient, so there was no rush. Now, Adam has been granted the title of baron upon his arrival, and has also assumed the important position of Minister of Commerce, demonstrating the Duke's recognition of his abilities. Christian was a little envious, but more focused on how to curry favor. As Minister of Foreign Affairs of the canton of Wesson, he had access to wireless communications. While communicating with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he instructed his staff to investigate any articles Adam had published and have them brought to him in Edinburgh. This matter was not concealed and soon spread throughout the city of Hanma. In addition to the person who fainted in the toilet, many people talked about Duke Wesson's practice of hiring foreign talents for important positions with huge sums of money. Some people seemed to see hope, but when they went to recommend themselves, they learned that Duke Wesson was not at home. They rushed to the night competition venue more than 100 kilometers away, but he was not there either. I hope it's not too late. Frederick had been a little bit weird these days. Baron Wesson didn't know why he was like this, so he asked, "Do you feel uncomfortable living here with me?" Frederick shook his head. Although Baron Wesson's castle was relatively small and it was indeed uncomfortable to live in, he would not say such things. "I'm worried whether this matter can reach the city of Borling in time," he sighed and said. "The latest news is that Prince Casimir of the Piast Kingdom recently sent wine, meat and women to the coalition forces outside the city of Borling, hoping that the coalition forces will not invade the kingdom of Piast. Now that the autumn harvest is over, the war should break out in the next few days." Baron Wesson asked him curiously, "Do you have any acquaintances there? If so, I can go and pick them up for you. It will take 2 days for a few horses to run there." Frederick sighed again, and said a little depressed, "I don't have any acquaintances, but there is a military academy there, and I want to invite them to my place. I'm worried that they have concerns, so I'll spread the word first, hoping that they will be tempted, and it will be much more convenient to recruit them later." In recent decades, military academies have appeared in many countries, and they have begun to shift from imparting experience to theoretical research. However, the scale of these academies is not large, and they are only for the children of aristocrats. Frederick was planning to establish a military academy, but experienced and intelligent individuals were valuable wherever they were. Summarizing experience and refining ideas wasn't something anyone could do, and qualified instructors were scarce. He had recently heard of a small military academy in Borling, also enrolling only aristocratic students. It had a good reputation and could be used as a model. However, the academy belonged to a family that was doing well and wouldn't move easily. Borling might be captured in this battle, and no one knew how the Piast Kingdom would handle these people, so Frederick was anxious. After listening to him, Baron Wesson smiled and said, "Oh, so it's Principal Gerhard's school. It's a bit difficult." Frederick was stunned and asked hurriedly, "Do you know where it is?" Baron Wesson replied with a smile, "Many people here are sent there to study for 1 or 2 years before inheriting the family business. I drank too much one day, and I don't know why I got into a fight with a principal. He was not a principal at that time. When I woke up, I found myself hanging upside down at the school gate. My eldest son is still there. Gerhard held a grudge and charged my family more tuition. I'll go and bring my son back now. If you are interested, you can write a letter and I will help give it to him. That guy is very smart." He won't believe everything he hears. Frederick was shocked and said hurriedly, "There is going to be a war, so why don't you take your eldest son back quickly?" "It's okay," Baron Wiesen said, "let him broaden his horizons. It's more useful than being a bookworm in a pile of books. Anyway, even if he is gone, there's still the second son at home." "Don't worry." Frederick was speechless. Chapter 208 Lightning Attack Speed. At dawn, the stench of alcohol still lingered in the camp. Men snored in their tents, hugging women as voluptuous as themselves. A bugle blared through the camp, accompaniment to the snoring in the tents. Some soldiers gathered around a pot, finishing a bowl of musty oatmeal, then yawned and cursed as they went off to relieve their guard. The back gate was in chaos. A wagon carrying provisions had overturned while crossing the drawbridge, spilling sausages from a barrel into a waist-deep trench. The guard jumped down, picked up the sausages without a word, and began chewing them, stuffing them into his clothes. Seeing this, the relievers followed suit, and soon even the guards in the nearby tower joined in the fight for the sausages, leading to a violent scene. The sausages that were distributed were quickly gone, but someone was willing to let more go. A knight rushed over and angrily whipped the soldiers with his whip, cursing, "A bunch of rats. Have you ever eaten sausage in your life?" A soldier looked up and said, "We've been eating only moldy oatmeal for so long." The knight raised his whip and brought it down, leaving a deep bloody groove on the soldier's face. Just as the knight raised his whip again, about to bring it down, he froze in his tracks. Enemy attack. In the early morning sunlight, a black wave surged out of the forest a kilometer away, charging towards the camp with a thundering sound of hoofs. No one in the coalition could have imagined that the pissed winged hussars would bypass the trenches and obstacles on the eastern front and charge out from the forest behind. Behind these cavalrymen stood a pair of wings, each metal feather inscribed with a magic circle, allowing them to cast different spells in battle. Each knight's wing now bore a metal feather, its rim reflecting a distorted light. This was a weight-reducing magic, unique to the pissed royal family, that reduced the load on the knight's steed, allowing the horse to gallop with all its might. A kilometer was a short distance for the winged hussars, and they soon approached the camp's walls. An eagle's cry echoed from the sky, and several giant eagles, each with a wingspan exceeding 20 meters, swooped down, charging toward the wall. 10 meters above the ground, they suddenly leveled themselves, their bodies erect, and their wings whipped up gusts of wind blades that slammed into the wall. The 3-meter-tall wooden wall, like tofu slashed by steel, was quickly ripped open by the wind blades. Thousands of winged hussars leaped over the ditch and charged unopposed into the camp, dispersing in groups of dozens. Countless tents were knocked over and trampled, their horses' hooves quickly staining the ground red. The Allied soldiers fled in panic like headless flies, ultimately falling to their swords. Some attempted to organize a resistance, only to be snatched up by giant eagles descending from the sky, carried screaming through the air, and then dropped freely. A dozen or so winged cavalry units had a clear target, the tents of the nobles. These men, each highly skilled in martial arts and armed with the upper hand, quickly eliminated the nobles, and the entire coalition's command system collapsed in less than half an hour. In front of the camp, a sea of colorful flags formed a sea of flowers. Tens of thousands of infantrymen advanced slowly in formation, crossing trenches, moving barricades, and smashing down walls to join the slaughter. 2 kilometers south of the camp, on a hilltop, the scent of blood on the north wind was still palpable, drawing wild beasts in their wake. A middle-aged man in his 40s stood quietly on the hilltop, gazing at the distant slaughter. Turning, he saw the giant eagle had already flown into the city of Borling. "Principal, let's go," Baron Wiesen said to the middle-aged man. "Even I, who never fails the exams, can see that it's all over." Gerhard sighed deeply and said with some self-blame, "I clearly reminded them. If I had insisted a little longer." Baron Wiesen shook his head and said with a wry smile, "Don't you know what kind of people we are? If you had listened to advice, we would have got full marks in every subject." Gerhard sighed again. There were many of his former students in the military camp in the north, but after today, he was afraid that only half of them would be alive. "Wesen," he asked the student with whom he had once clashed, "is Duke Wesen someone who can take advice?" Baron Wesen thought for a moment and shook his head. "I don't know. You have to find him wrong to persuade him. But I think what he says makes sense. He's the one who persuades others, but he's been beaten a lot when he made mistakes during his free time, and he never complains." Gerhard thought for a moment, glanced at the smoke rising from the military camp, and turned. "Let's go. It's too late." A large convoy was parked behind the hill. The carriages were loaded with boxes and parcels, with children and women sitting on the luggage. Many were fully armed and mounted. They were teachers and students from the military academy, awaiting the return of the principal. They looked curiously at the cavalrymen in grey battalions and the unicorns mounted by the two knights. Frederick was a little worried, so he sent out a cavalry escort and a company of magicians for protection. The convoy set off, and news quickly reached Frederick, 300 kilometers away. Upon learning that the battle had begun, he immediately dispatched 2 more cavalry companies to reinforce. The slaughter on the battlefield continued, and by noon, the prisoners were all tied together, 10 at a time, and handed over to the smiling slave traders. When the Piast army appeared outside the city of Borling, the city's lord surrendered to 2 messengers who arrived on giant eagles. In the largest Piast tent, Casimir, with the help of his attendants, removed his wings, half-armor, and full-body mail, finally removing his sweat-soaked inner clothing. When his lieutenant brought the news of Borling's surrender, several slave girls were carefully cleaning him. Casimir said calmly, "Have them provide food, gold, and women. Tell the others to go to the wealthier city of Hammer, as previously agreed, and give them another 10 days' leave. Send a message to the kingdom of Denmark that we have captured Borling as planned and tell them to march." The lieutenant bowed and departed, and a moment later, complaints could be heard from outside. From the nobles, soldiers, and conscripted peasants of the Piast army to their anti-allies and mercenaries from the east, everyone eagerly anticipated the opportunity to plunder the city. As for Hammer, few had ever been there. But Casimir, unwilling to waste time, offered them promises and then stabilized them with a promise of something from Borling. That same day, the Piast Kingdom's Southern Legion, numbering 60,000, suddenly appeared in the Upper Elbe region. They formed 10 divisions of 2,000 men each, seizing key towns while exploiting the gaps in defense. The Southern Legion's main force of 40,000 men attacked the city of Linden, over 100 kilometers away, and that same night they attacked and captured the crucial city. Leaving 5,000 men behind to defend it, the main force headed north to capture other areas, preparing to link up with the Northern Legion. The next day, the Northern Legion, with 100,000 men remaining, left 10,000 to garrison Borling. The remaining 20,000 men also dispersed to capture key towns in the surrounding area as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the entire region east of the Elbe was ablaze with war. The local lords and their main forces were annihilated in a single battle, while the Piast army moved with remarkable swiftness, soon conquering a vast area. Upon hearing the news, the people gathered their belongings and fled, with countless refugees, dragging their families, rushing westward towards the Elbe, attempting to cross the river and find safety. Casimir seized all the pack animals and wagons along the road to Hammer, outpacing the refugees and reaching Wessenland across the river on November 2nd. On November 3rd, 30,000 troops of the Southern Legion, armed with boats collected along the way, joined the Northern Legion, bringing the total Piast force to 100,000. On the morning of November 5th, the Piast army crossed the Elbe River on pontoon bridges at 3 ferry crossings and entered the deserted Wessenland. Casimir commanded the Piast army, crossing the Oder River on October 21st and capturing the city of Borling on the 22nd. In just 15 days, they annihilated 60,000 men and occupied a vast area stretching 300 kilometers from the Oder River west to the Elbe River east. The news of this victory astonished the world. The world dubbed this battle the Lightning Campaign for its lightning-fast command, marking the rise of a new star. On the same day the Piast army crossed the Elbe, a 60,000-man Danmark army appeared outside the eastern walls of Hammer, bewildered by the bastion. Chapter 209 Siege of the Bastion. On the battlefield, the distance between enemy and allied forces is crucial, and countless generals use this distance to formulate their tactics. For the Danmark Kingdom's army, the bastion east of Hammer city presented a significant challenge. Magic crystal cannons come in many varieties, but generally fire destructive magic at ranges of hundreds of meters. However, these attacks dissipate with distance and flight time, limiting their range. The magic crystal cannons on Hammer city have a maximum range of 700 meters, with an effective range of approximately 600 meters. To launch an attack on the city walls, the Danmark army would need to position their own magic crystal cannons at a distance of 800 meters, then, under the cover of the Mage Corps, move into effective range, also from approximately 600 meters. This bastion, however, was approximately 500 meters from the city walls. If it contained massive trebuchets or crossbows, they could use their superior vantage point to inflict damage on the magic crystal cannons. With the threat of the magic crystal cannon gone, the infantry formed up 500 meters from the city wall, where the bastion was perfectly positioned. There are quite a lot of people here. It's going to be hard to clean up the battlefield. Archduke Mainz and Archduke Bane observed the enemy positions through high-powered binoculars, which, mounted on a tripod, were sufficient to clearly identify enemy equipment from afar. There are so many pagan mercenaries. Grand Duke Mainz was very indignant. Frederick should be called over, and the angels should go over and slap them each. Grand Duke Bane looked at the warriors wearing horned helmets and said, "Let's not disturb him. I'm worried whether he can handle so many enemies." "Don't worry, my two lords," Bruce said from the side. "What we have here, the master also has. No problem." "Wow. How did those bears turn into humans?" Grand Duke Mainz frowned and said, "They are the oak priests of the Church of Nature in the north. After turning into bears, they have strong melee ability, and they can also turn into wolves that run very fast. It is said that those with strong abilities can even turn into birds and fly in the air, but their status is very high, so they will not come as mercenaries." Then Gerhard said worriedly, "The enemy actually brought 30 magic crystal cannons. This is the biggest threat to us. Should we organize a night attack to destroy it?" The main reason why Gerhard fled with his family, teachers and students was because the Piast Kingdom was about to attack, and Frederick's recruitment was secondary. After all, he was the principal, and being reduced to vice principal position under Frederick was somewhat displeased. So, wanting him to experience the new weapon firsthand, Frederick suggested he visit the bastion. The Archduke of Bane, somewhat concerned, turned to Bruce and asked, "The enemy has emptied their resources to ship all these magic crystal cannons this time. Can you handle them?" Bruce didn't answer immediately, but instead carefully observed the enemy's magic crystal cannons. These large barrels ranged in caliber from 60 mm to 200 mm, with small ones measuring 2 or 3 meters long and large ones reaching 7 or 8 meters. Transporting them here was a challenge. To use the magic crystal cannons, they had to be assembled on sufficiently large and sturdy carriages. Otherwise, they would be stationary on earthen platforms, effectively limiting their use to attacking city walls and gates. The master said, Bruce muttered sleepwalkingly, "Caliber is justice, range is truth. Justice and truth must prevail. If you fail, it means the caliber is not large enough and the range is not long enough." 14.3, the sacred constant. As long as the attack energy is greater than 14.3 times the energy contained in the volume formed by the contact surface of the magic shield and the depth of the attack force, the defense is ineffective. The best way to destroy the enemy is to block the gate, then to march, and finally to fight in formation. Grand Duke Bane felt bad. This young man seemed a little unreliable. Bruce began to mutter things like wind speed and direction, and finally said, "The enemy's magic crystal cannons are 900 to 950 meters from our position. We can eliminate them now." "No rush," said Grand Duke Mainz. "Wait until they have loaded the artillery carriages before blowing them up." Grand Duke Bane nodded and said, "I think it's okay." The day was spent in the Danmar army's encampment, without even sending an envoy. Perhaps they thought the fortress's walls were too low, making them easy to take down, and there was no night attack. The next morning, outside the Danmar camp, trumpets blew and banners filled the sky. 60,000 soldiers formed up and pressed towards the bastion. "This is a demonstration," Gerhard said gravely. "They want to capture us in one fell swoop and intimidate the city of Hammer. Maybe our heads will be impaled on pikes and placed at the city gates." Grand Duke Mainz said casually, "I'm satisfied with my neck now, but I don't want a wooden one." Grand Duke Bane joked, "You can ask for a gold one. I think they'll agree." Grand Duke Mainz glanced at him and said, "I'll have them replace your neck with a slime." Gerhard watched the two of them bickering, oblivious to an enemy 20 times their size, and looked around at the soldiers eager to test their strange weapons. He felt a strange feeling. Leading the Danmar army were conscripted peasants carrying long wooden planks. The shipyards outside the city had been completely deserted, and the planks they carried for shipbuilding were placed right on top of the moat. In front of the moat stood a knee-high heap of straw, a cordon that, according to the spies, prohibited anyone from crossing. The conscripted peasants paid no heed, pairing up in pairs to hold the planks above their heads. The only danger now was the arrows raining down from the sky. Those in the front suddenly saw the straw explode, and then they lost consciousness. 10 kg this way. 2 enemy explosives exploded in succession, sending a cloud of blood rising from the crowd as countless men fell like mowed wheat. A momentary silence fell on the battlefield, and those who had recovered their senses fled back, crying and shouting. Shortly thereafter, several magicians from the Danmar army cautiously advanced, their eyes fixed on their shields, and launched a flurry of fireballs, igniting the remaining straw. Bruce asked the two leaders, "Should we kill them?" Grand Duke Mines immediately declared to Grand Duke Bane, "You take command today." The most pressing issue in commanding a battle was the lack of unified command, so he decided to address this first. "Don't worry about them now," Grand Duke Bane said with a slight nod. "These are just apprentices. Wait until the magisterium is dispatched and we can finish them off in one fell swoop." The Danmar conscripted peasants, terrified by the explosion, refused to fight again, even at the cost of a beating. "The infidels are coming," Bruce shouted. Over 3,000 Darklands mercenaries, wearing horned helmets, marched out of the battle formation, pouring wine from their hip flasks as they advanced. Gerhard frowned and said, "The kind of wine they drink is intoxicating, making them insensitive to pain." As he finished, the mercenaries roared, charging from afar, round shields in one hand and axes in the other. Their speed was so fast that Frederick could easily break an Olympic record back home, if only they hadn't banned performance-enhancing drugs. The warrior charging in front was incredibly tall and burly, nearly 2.5 meters tall. He was wearing double plate armor, and his running felt like a mountain moving, the ground trembling with every step. Then he stepped on an anti-cavalry mine, and the ground shook even more violently. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210, First Day of Fighting. Located in the northernmost reaches of the Dark Land, the climate is cold, with short days and long nights. Aside from cultivating a type of barley with a short growth cycle, the locals primarily rely on hunting and gathering. The harsh living conditions have cultivated a fierce character in those who survive. The death of their companions is commonplace, and for the ultimate victory, even without drugs, they will not waver when others fall. Before the men could cross the first trench, the Archduke of Bavaria ordered the firing. Iron ore is plentiful in the north, but smelting and processing technology is relatively backward. However, the abundance of furs has enabled them to develop advanced leather armor, and bullets quickly pierced the leather armor inlaid with iron plates. Their strong bodies blocked out the pain. Even with blood gushing from holes in their bodies, some men leaped across the 3-meter-wide trench and ran towards the bastion, only to collapse from excessive blood loss or trip over barbed wire. "Don't stop," Grand Duke Bane paced back and forth on the wall facing the enemy's attack. "Fire all your ammunition in the crowded area and hand it over to the people behind you." Their revolvers were having trouble loading, so each fired while the other reloaded to maintain a continuous barrage. Behind the mercenaries, conscripted peasants came up again, carrying planks. Placing them across the trench, they immediately ran to either side. Following them came heavy infantry in full plate armor, ready to cover the crossbowmen as they crossed the trench and advanced toward the bastion. The Danmar army's tactics were clear. The mercenaries would draw the fire, while the heavy infantry would cover the crossbowmen and exchange fire with the men on the wall. Then, the heavy infantry would ascend the wall after the next wave of light infantry brought in ladders and other equipment. Grand Duke Bane approached Bruce and said, "We can use the mines in the trench." Bruce immediately replied excitedly, "Wait until those iron cans are in place." Grand Duke Bane agreed. The shipbuilding planks were sturdy, resting on the ground at one end and the earthen slope across the trench at the other. 1 or 2 heavy infantrymen, clad in iron cans, could easily make it up. The problem was that the slope contained enemy facing this side embedded within it, and only a thin layer of earth covered the outside. The Wesson State's wireless communication system, a precursor to Heinrich's remote-controlled magic, was perfectly suited for controlling mines. As the heavy infantry reached the center, Bruce flipped a series of switches on the controller. A torrent of steel balls swept across the front of the trench once again, destroying the iron cans on the planks and knocking down those in the front row. Some of the steel balls soared high, flying over the heavy infantrymen's heads and picking off the leather-armored archers in the rear. The Danmar mercenaries, disconnected from the rear, bravely rushed to within a short distance of the bastion, but were quickly met with concentrated revolver rifle fire, falling to their deaths. A horn blasted, signaling the simultaneous launch of the mage regiment and the small magic crystal cannons, while more infantry pressed forward. Gerhard said to Grand Duke Bane, "Their commander is formidable. He doesn't hesitate to take lives." Grand Duke Bane sneered, "They think victory is guaranteed. So they're willing to fill the trenches." He turned to Bruce and said, "If the mage regiment wants to fill the trenches, let them do it. Once they're done, attack immediately." Gerhard nodded slightly. He could tell he was experienced. After filling the trenches, the enemy mages would become fatigued and relaxed, making an attack most effective. Bruce asked, puzzled, "Why let them fill the trenches when we can bomb them now?" Grand Duke Bane didn't have time to respond, so Gerhard said, "You know the advantages of guarding the bridges. If the enemy only fills one or a few sections of the trench, we know where they'll come from. We can focus our attention on those areas. If we have to fill the entire trench and tire them out, we won't lose out." Bruce nodded, thinking, "That's right. We've divided the mortar firing areas before the battle. We can just concentrate our fire on a few areas." The magicians took action. Their combined bombardment with the crystal cannons collapsed the trench and the slope behind it, creating a 50-meter-long breach. In the center of the bastion, 16 mortars were arranged in a diamond formation of 4. They had planned their firing ranges before the battle, spending several nights practicing with practice rounds and compiling firing charts. Now, they simply fired according to the areas Bruce had reported. Catapults. Someone in the Danmar army saw dozens of black dots flying out of the bastion every few seconds, landing on the positions of the mage regiment and the crystal cannons. Many others on the battlefield were unfazed. Beyond the initial impact, the greater damage from the trebuchet stones came from their ricocheting and tumbling across the ground. This required a relatively straight trajectory to carry enough force for lateral movement, otherwise, they would simply create a crater. Some courageous individuals, seeing dark shadows flying towards them, were unfazed and casually stepped back to avoid the impact. This time, the shells were no longer filled with steel balls, but with pre-fragmented cast iron shells, and they were the most explosive. From the city walls, Gerhard watched as the rapid fire from the 5.16 mortars sent limbs flying everywhere. Even the magic crystal cannons were blown 2 or 3 meters high. He was momentarily silent. Grand Duke Bane immediately ordered an attack on the more distant magic crystal cannons, ensuring their frames were destroyed. Despite suffering heavy casualties among their precious heavy infantry, the enemy commander, instead of retreating, deployed the mage regiment and small magic crystal cannons. The large magic crystal cannons might be next, and the enemy's rearguard action must be eliminated. This time, Bruce ordered a training round fired at the magic crystal cannon storage area 900 meters away. As expected, it was blown off course by the wind, so he redirected the round and fired another. While the shells were still flying, Grand Duke Bern asked, "So few?" He immediately received the answer, exclaiming in surprise, "It's a magic bullet." The magic shell struck behind the magic crystal cannon storage area, creating a white fireball 2 or 3 meters in diameter that exploded into a sky full of stars. Tens of thousands of pure white magical flames fell within a 100-meter radius, resembling edelweiss blooming high in the mountains. These flames clung to surfaces like snot, scorching everything. Even the elemental metal of the magic crystal cannon barrel, leaving it pitted and dented. The billowing smoke and the wailing, fleeing figures decimated the entire Danmar army, and they ultimately retreated to camp. Cheers echoed not only from the bastion but also from the distant walls of Handmer City. Bruce chuckled triumphantly, but the faces of the other leaders nearby were solemn. "Eat as much as you can tonight," Grand Duke Mines finally spoke. "If no one launches a midnight raid, tomorrow will be difficult." Grand Duke Bane and Gerhard nodded in unison. The first day of the battle had intensified the enmity between the two sides, and the Danmar kingdom must be held accountable for today's heavy losses. Even if they couldn't attack Handmer City, they had to take this bastion. Only in this way could they restore their low morale. Therefore, for the Danmar kingdom, victory in the next battle was a must, defeat was not a consideration. The next day, November 7th, with just over an hour before dawn, the Danmar army's camp was already ablaze with lights, and tens of thousands of soldiers filed out after a hearty breakfast. Chapter 211. The battle ends on the second day. Quick! Quick! Bring the bullets, grenades. More grenades, magic crystals. Anyone got any? Bring them. Rapid shouts echoed from the bastion's walls. The air seemed thick with blood, and every breath felt like it was being soaked in it. Madness. Gerhard was terrified. Even after his years of battle, the sight of the Danmar soldiers, brave enough to fight, still deeply shocked him. The morning had been fine. The enemy had employed conventional tactics to wear down the defenders, but at noon, they suddenly launched a fierce attack. There was no room for strategy on the battlefield now. The trenches outside the bastion were filled with corpses. Mortar shells would even get stuck among the bodies, causing the triggering fuses to fail, waiting for the delay fuses, designed to prevent stink bombs, to activate. The attackers used everything from ladders to corpses to scale the walls, scaling the wall to the point where the bodies were piled nearly 2 meters above the wall. Many carried bodies from the ground as they rushed up, eventually adding their own to the climb. The defenders fired relentlessly at anything moving below. Farmers, previously responsible for logistics, tossed grenades into the crowded areas. The riflemen kept pulling the triggers, many with swollen index fingers, resorting to using their middle fingers. Bruce's mortar shells were quickly depleted to a mere last resort, though they had already destroyed most of the enemy's canned goods. They were now simply beveling tent poles, inserting them into their cannon barrels, and firing them as javelins. Each javelin could kill a number of people. Atop the wall, the Archduke of Bayern sat panting, his tongue lolling from exhaustion. Next to him, the Archduke of Mainz was in even worse shape, a wound on his left cheek. "I can't believe it," said Grand Duke Mainz triumphantly. "I'm 80, and I still bear battlefield wounds." "I bet you'll pee your feet when you're 80 without support." Grand Duke Bane didn't want to talk, he was only a few years younger. The Danish army had just organized a commando force composed entirely of experts to scale the wall. After a small number of them were killed by triple-barreled P-guns stationed in a corner, they finally reached the wall. Then, the P-gun shooters fired grenades, taking out several men, buying time for the two commanders to close the breach. After catching his breath, Grand Duke Bane said, "It looks like Flensburg has succeeded." Grand Duke Mainz nodded. Gerhard was startled, then immediately understood what was happening. Flensburg is located north of Hammer, in the middle of the Simplica Peninsula, south of the Danish kingdom, and is a crucial transportation hub. The capture of Flensburg meant that the Danish army's road access was cut off. With no way out, they could only capture a place as a stronghold, otherwise the coming winter would destroy them. "Who did it?" Gerhard asked incredulously. "Do we have extra troops?" The Grand Duke of Bane smiled and said, "The Royal Magisterium." The Grand Duke of Mainz also said, "That brat, Frederick, when he asked for help from home, said all the tactics should be turned to home invasion. He told the Royal Magisterium to steal the enemy's important cities. Even if they didn't capture them, they could still mobilize the enemy to come back for reinforcements." The Grand Duke of Bane said angrily, "Now the enemy has fallen on us." The Grand Duke of Mainz thought for a moment and asked, "Can they move now?" The Grand Duke of Bane looked up at the sky and said, "About dusk?" Gerhard asked in surprise, "Are there any troops left to participate in the battle?" "Of course." The Grand Duke of Bane smiled again. "Otherwise, why would Count Delden organize the nightly tournament?" Gerhard's eyes widened in disbelief. "Is this all planned?" He had initially thought the defenders were unlucky, the enemy arriving while the main knights were gathering for fun far away, but he didn't expect this to be all planned. "Can they make it in time?" he asked worriedly. The Grand Duke of Bavaria calmly replied, "Frederick says we can catch up." Meanwhile, in a forest 2 kilometers east of the bastion, several men, wearing large pieces of bark and strapped to their bodies, carefully observed the battlefield through binoculars. In the woods below, fully armed knights fed their horses things like candy, alongside nearly 20,000 infantrymen. In the trees, Count Delden quietly calculated the remaining Danish forces and the route of their upcoming march. The Danish army's main force was in the north, with weaker forces to the east and south. If the southern forces were defeated first, the defeated troops could be used to break up the eastern and northern formations. The nightly tournament was still underway, but the participants were all nobles from the west bank of the Elbe. Some pretended to be contestants, while others followed Count Delden across the river, bypassing the Piast army's main camp. Thanks to the widespread use of bearings exported from Wesseland in carriages, and the large number of carriages they had recruited, this detour was a success. Count Delden thought the enemy was almost there, and he expected them to be in a dilemma by dusk, at which point Grand Duke Bane would give the signal. Local expletive, Count Delden suddenly cursed, then lowered his head and shouted, "Quick! Attack immediately!" From the bastion walls, Grand Duke Bane and his men heard the distant sound of a bugle call. Suddenly, a cavalry of over 300 men burst from the north, led by a winged unicorn and bearing the banner of a golden double-headed eagle. They charged headfirst into the enemy headquarters in the rear of the Danmar army. They didn't charge directly, each man emptied at least 2 magazines before charging into the enemy lines, and they also lobbed poison gas bombs into the wind. "Why is he here?" And coming from the north, Archduke Mainz looked bewildered. "Is the fighting in the south over?" Archduke Bane scratched his head and said uncertainly, "Didn't he say he was going to set an ambush? Maybe the cavalry won't be needed, so he'll just come here on his own. That's good. We can free up our forces to help him." The Danmar army wasn't so calm. First, a group of men suddenly died in the rear amid the sound of bugles. Turning around, they saw a cloud of white smoke before them, and every breath they took caused them to cough uncontrollably. Before they could form their ranks, a group of cavalrymen in gray uniforms burst out of the smoke. Both men and horses had large eyes and long noses. The deeds of the Wesson army were being touted as miraculous, and the recent events in Amstel seemed to confirm that they were not human but demonic. With Amstel's advanced maritime transport, word quickly spread along the North Sea coast. The Danish army's first formation was quickly overwhelmed, and the retreating soldiers immediately brought down the second line of defense, which had been somewhat intimidated by the legend. Frederick and his 3 cavalry companies cut through the enemy like a steel knife, meeting no resistance. On the Danish side, a middle-aged man in gilded plate armor, realizing the enemy was coming for him, immediately led a group of well-equipped cavalry, raising their banners and charging forward. Bane at curse word, the Grand Duke of Bane roared as he saw the first banner through his telescope. "It's Valdemar, the king of the kingdom of Danmar." And his knights, he was shocked and angry. "Why hadn't we heard anything before? I thought it was some marshal." After his surprise, the Archduke of Mainz said calmly, "No wonder they were willing to sacrifice their lives. It turns out he's in command. Frederick is in trouble. I hope he flees when he sees the tide is turning." They had heard many rumors about King Valdemar of the Kingdom of Danmar in the south. Even if the exaggerations were removed, it was clear that he was a battle-hardened and undefeated general, and a formidable warrior himself. Valdemar, mounted on his warhorse, led his battle-hardened companions as they charged towards Frederick and his men. He felt a sense of calm. He had fought for years and faced desperate situations many times, but he had always emerged victorious. He had no doubt that this time would be the same. He was also a little curious. He was delighted to hear about Duke Wesson's deeds for the first time. He had also lost his father in his youth and subsequently lost much territory, only to regain it all with his own sword and even more. So he developed a feeling of mutual admiration, and praised Duke Wesson in public many times. Valdemar thought that he might meet him after the war, and if he was captured, he could help pay the ransom, but he didn't expect that their first meeting would be on a life-and-death battlefield. When he was 100 meters away, he saw Frederick and others rushing towards him again after breaking out of the army formation, and suddenly found that they took out a new weapon from behind the saddle. This new weapon looked like a war hammer, with a long pole and a big head, and it looked heavy. Then Valdemar almost laughed out loud under his helmet, because the war hammer could actually fly, and the one in Duke Wesson's hand flew towards him. The flying speed of this thing was faster than that of an arrow, and Valdemar could even reach out and grab the short pole behind it. "Lighter than I expected," he thought. "I'll use this to smash Duke Wesson down with." At that moment, he suddenly remembered that many objects flying from the bastion were likely to explode. The shaped charge in the homemade hollow charge warhead exploded, releasing a jet of metal that instantly pierced Valdemar's armor and body, even burning off his horse's tail. Frederick breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed the Iron Fist needed to be faster, otherwise it would be ineffective against a skilled opponent. Valdemar fell from his horse, and the knights around him were no better off. Many raised their shields to block, but the jet of metal still pierced them. The few remaining knights used their weapons to deflect the rocket, but the shrapnel and subsequent bullets still ended their lives. The king fell, and the Danmar army was thrown into chaos. A situation that was rapidly escalated by the cavalry company. Frederick jumped off the Don and picked up the flag from the ground and put it away. Then, after a moment's thought, he took Valdemar's helmet, sword, and ring as trophies. At this moment, Count Delden led a large group of troops out of the woods, becoming the final straw that broke the Danmar army's back. Practice has proven that 30,000 men are easier to capture than 30,000 pigs. The Grand Dukes of Bane and Mainz immediately found Frederick. The Grand Duke of Mainz hurriedly asked, "What's going on in the south?" Frederick calmly replied, "It was resolved this morning." So quickly, the Grand Duke of Bane was shocked. How was it resolved? Chapter 212, Seizing Air Supremacy. Back to November 5th, the day the Piast army crossed the Elbe. After the pontoon bridge was built, Casimir commanded the crossing while dispatching a group of emissaries to meet with the Duke of Wesseland at his castle. The first group of Piasts to cross the river quickly established a bridgehead several hundred meters long, and then the main force began to cross. Casimir arrived at a wooden fortress by the river and observed carefully, confirming that the occupants had escaped just as he reached the other side. A box containing tableware was left in a corner. The high ground provided a good view from the watchtower, offering a panoramic view of the surroundings. The entire west bank of the Elbe was silent, with no expected counterattack. Several giant eagles circled overhead, scanning for the enemy's position. One eagle suddenly swooped down, its trajectory suggesting it had spotted some food, such as cattle or sheep. Casimir paid no attention, as giant eagles have voracious appetites and would need to forage for themselves along the way, a common occurrence. These giant eagles, in particular, weren't very intelligent. Some, hungry, would act without warning at the sight of food, disregarding the commands of their riders. They had to be fed before each action. After surveying the terrain for a moment, Casimir suddenly noticed several giant eagles circling 100 meters above the spot where the previous eagle had swooped, seemingly searching for an enemy. His brow furrowed slightly. Could the previous one have fallen into a trap? Bare forests are a disadvantage for giant eagles. Tall trees make it difficult for them to detect and attack targets on the ground. They need to lower their altitude. Those familiar with their characteristics would set traps in the open areas of the forest. He had brought 7 giant eagles and knights from the Royal Air Knights with him, and his bottom line was that he could lose 2. Losing one inexplicably would be a disaster. Just as he'd finished thinking, 3 giant eagles suddenly and without warning plummeted, while the other 3 struggled to gain distance. Casimir's eyes widened, confused as to what had happened. At the scene, the soldiers of the Wesson army cheered. This was an open pasture nestled in the woods. Last night, a cow was tied in the middle of the meadow, to this way, enemy bullets strapped to its back. With all the people and livestock now evacuated from the entire Wesson territory, only this single cow could be seen in such a vast area. So, the first giant eagle swooped down, then transformed into a sieve. By the time the other giant eagle riders noticed something was amiss and began searching for possible enemies, the Wesson soldiers hidden throughout the pasture, upon receiving the signal, simultaneously emerged and fired their entire magazine into predetermined airspace. Compared to the targets towed by Dawn during training, giant eagles with wingspans exceeding 10 meters and slow, low-altitude flight were much easier to deal with. The eagles that had narrowly escaped attack flapped their wings vigorously, trying to soar higher, but their slow climb speed meant they were no match for the exuberant Dawn. Frederick had begun considering aerial combat since receiving Dawn. As a fan of aerial combat games in his previous life, he considered himself adept at exploiting strengths and mitigating weaknesses. Compared to the winged unicorn, the giant eagle's advantages are its high altitude and high dive speed. Its disadvantages are its slow flight speed, especially its slow climb rate, and its maneuverability. So, Frederick, armed with a P-gun equipped with an extended magazine, flew with Dawn behind the enemy lines to launch an attack. A knight on the giant eagle's back spotted Frederick and realized they were outnumbered, a significant advantage. At the knight's command, one of the giant eagles turned and flapped its wings, sending out a gust of wind blades, attempting to force Frederick back and gain distance while buying time for its companions. However, Frederick didn't retreat. He took advantage of the opportunity to fire several more shots, until the blue wind blades were blocked by Dawn's golden magic shield a few meters ahead. This time, Frederick gained the upper hands in this clash of magic and physics. The giant eagle screamed and plummeted dozens of meters before finally making a shaky landing on the edge of the pasture. The other 2 knights, riding on the giant eagles, saw something was amiss and immediately turned and fled. Frederick caught up to one, but this time he didn't fire. Dawn kicked the eagle's wing with his hoof. Frederick heard the sound of bones cracking, turned to the panicked knight, smiled, and pointed to the ground. The knight immediately maneuvered the injured giant eagle down, finally landing on the pasture. The last giant eagle flew towards the ferry. Casimir, watching the aerial battle from the watchtower, furiously tore the tower railings apart with his hands. Frederick, not wanting to miss the last of the pissed air power, pursued and dealt with it. Casimir, squinting at the pale golden shadows in the sky, ordered his troops to speed across the river and pay attention to air defenses. Frederick spoke to Helmut over the communicator. The air threat has been neutralized. We can proceed. Remember, fire and move, fire and run. He ignored the rest of the battle. Without an air force to provide visibility from above, the enemy had little to offer the Wesson troops in the forest. Frederick observed the enemy's position from the air for a moment. At dawn, he gathered a large number of fist-sized rocks from a distance, flew them to the highest possible altitude, and hurled them down upon the crowd. Rocks dropped from such a height could easily kill a person, and this one crushed several men, including 2 horses. These casualties were insignificant for a 100,000-man army, but they filled everyone with trepidation. Everyone looked up at the sky, and by the time Frederick returned to the pissed army for the second time, many had sore necks. This time, Frederick stopped throwing random rocks and targeted the winged hussars. However, these elite pists were better equipped than ordinary soldiers, and with their shields protecting them from harm, they were safe from injury. Frederick then switched to larger rocks, which offered a clearer view, and the roughly half-minute free fall was enough for many to avoid. By noon, Frederick had vanished, likely because his mount had grown hungry, and the entire pissed army breathed a sigh of relief. The troops that had not yet crossed the river breathed a sigh of relief, but the nightmare of the army on the other side of the river had just begun. The P-gun still had a certain killing power against a target at a distance of 400 to 500 meters. At this distance, the sound of gunfire could no longer be heard. Therefore, when the soldiers defending the enemy in the outer position of the ferry suddenly fell, no one knew where the attack came from. Frederick ordered all the troops to spread out in small groups and began to harass the enemy under the cover of the woods near the ferry. This harassment was not aimed at killing people, as long as it could create mental pressure on the enemy. The magician company who had been converted to snipers was also dispatched, specifically picking out guys wearing armor. Casimir was shot on the shoulder, but it only ricocheted and did not cause much damage. He quickly descended from the watchtower and furiously shouted, "Go find them all. Chop them into sticks and hang them from the trees." Then he calmed himself and gave the order, "Once you've crossed the river and gathered 10,000 men, leave immediately. Don't wait for those behind you. Let those behind you cross the bridge quickly." The Wesson troops in the woods, seeing the enemy approaching, fought for a while before retreating. The pissed troops at the 3 crossings began to march. The roughly 10,000-man column, formed in 5-man columns, stretched a kilometer, and with the convoys, stretched nearly 2 kilometers. Helmut, receiving reports from the front, ordered them to be spared, conserving his forces to destroy the enemy cavalry. Chapter 213 Smashing Things. In the eyes of Frederick and Helmut, the most formidable element of the pissed army was the 1,000 winged hussars, followed by the 50-plus mage regiments, and then the over 2,000 light cavalry. Frederick was puzzled by the enemy's paucity of magicians. Helmut speculated that they might be bolstering the defenses of northern Bohemia. Otherwise, the troops withdrawn there would be easily defeated by the Osmagian Empire, leading to a standoff between gods and demons. In the afternoon, the pissed cavalry and accompanying auxiliary troops began to depart the ferry, heading northwest for their designated campsite. From a hidden command post in the forest, Frederick watched his staff place small flags representing different enemy groups on a map. The pissed army, divided into 3 groups from 3 ferry crossings, advanced towards their predetermined campsites, refusing to slow down even as they stepped on numerous mines along the way. "Commander," Helmut reported to Frederick, "the winged hussars are about to enter an ambush. According to the plan, the large number of this way-facing troops buried along the road would give the winged hussars a severe blow." "Let them go," Frederick suddenly said. "First, deal with the mage regiment at the back. Cavalry off horseback isn't as much of a threat, but the magicians are a different story. They might become the biggest source of surprise." Helmut immediately followed his orders and rearranged the troops. The staff had drawn up numerous contingency plans before the battle. If they failed to seize the opportunity to ambush the winged hussars, they had corresponding plans for ambushing the magicians instead. As long as Frederick's orders did not exceed the scope of the plans, there would be no problem. The sunset crept into the sky, and the first group of troops that had set out at noon had arrived at their designated camp. It was a small basin surrounded by hills, with a lake the size of 2 football fields in the center. The ground was covered with withered grass. Half of the Piast army were conscripted farmers. Upon arriving, the first group selected an area by the lake, enclosed it with wagons, and began cutting grass to feed the horses. The grass in the camp was quickly cut, and the outer part was also mowed so that the fire could not burn in. Soon after, Casimir followed a second group of cavalry to the camp and ordered the accompanying wagons to reinforce the wagon barrier to prevent the enemy from attacking at night. As the sky darkened, a faint roar was heard in the distance. "Is it thundering?" Casimir frowned. If it rained tonight, marching tomorrow would be difficult. At this time, the smell of food wafted through the camp. The ordinary soldiers threw whatever they had into the pot, and it eventually boiled into a huge pot of paste. Only the masters had barbecue to eat. When several female slaves served Casimir bread, barbecued meat, and soup made from dehydrated vegetables, a man covered in blood stumbled into the tent. "It's over. All the wizards are gone," the man burst into tears. There was a sudden explosion on the roadside, and many wizards were killed by mistake. Then a lot of firemen came out. "The wizards couldn't kill them, and they killed us one by one." Casimir's face darkened terribly at the thought of the wizard group being attacked on the road. He suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. He had just taken the same route as the wizard group. The enemy spared the cavalry and targeted the wizard group. Could it be that they thought they would travel with the wizard group? "Send a message." Casimir stood up suddenly. "Don't sleep tonight. The enemy may attack at night." His thoughts seemed to be confirmed. Not long after, Frederick came up again, throwing objects from the sky. This time, Frederick seemed prepared, throwing javelins instead of stones. Casimir carefully examined a javelin he had found. It was similar to an ordinary javelin, with a few stones tied to the back of the spearhead for weight. The casualties this time were not large, with less than 10 people killed. "Oh no," Casimir suddenly thought. "Quick! Distribute the food. Everything that can hold water, use it. They're going to set fire, now that they'd lost air superiority. If the enemy launched rockets or something like that, it would be a disaster." The recent attack on the mage corps was in direct evidence that the enemy was planning a fire, as mages were very good at putting out fires. From the air, Frederick watched the enemy frantically moving supplies, with many heading to the lake for water. He simply smiled and went back to make dinner. Artisha had put in a lot of effort in the ambush of the mage corps. The fire elementals she summoned drew the enemy's attention to the magic circle, allowing the sniper to confidently target them from the shadows. Frederick had made a deal with her. If they eliminated the mage corps, he would grill some lamb kebabs for her tonight. As Artisha ate her lamb kebabs with a smile, Casimir and the others felt threatened. Some, tired of straining their necks, simply lay down and stared at the sky. After Frederick had eaten, he and Dawn made another run, this time carrying several bundles of arrows. A handsome flower show. This time, they reaped a huge reward. The relatively small arrows were difficult to spot on the pitch-black night, and dozens of people were hit. Casimir looked at the half-lost arrows stuck in his tent and said gravely, "He's measuring the wind direction and speed. He's coming. Don't sleep." The Piast kingdom had its giant eagle knights, and as a crown prince, he naturally understood the art of aerial combat and knew that high-altitude bombing was difficult to hit, requiring the calculation of the margin of error before dropping something. He therefore concluded that the next step was a formal attack. Meanwhile, Frederick was feeding Dawn a bucket of energy drink made from a mixture of sugar, salt, and raw eggs, and brushing its fur for a long time before returning to his tent to soak his feet, wipe himself, and sleep. Casimir, he might strike in the early morning, he might come in the second half of the night. The time before sunrise is the most dangerous. Does anyone know where their base is? Should we send someone to ask if he's overslept? Pistkers. Is he coming or not? Let's have breakfast. After a night of high tension, the Piast soldiers listlessly began to build a fire and cook breakfast. The wind was strong this morning, and the smoke quickly dissipated into the southern sky. As the water boiled, Casimir pointed at Frederick in the air and cursed him. He waited all night for no one to come, and now he's throwing things early in the morning while people are cooking. What's more, this guy wasn't throwing stones, javelins, or arrows, but horse manure. Even more outrageous, the manure scattered in the air, spreading over a large area. And a lot of it landed in the pots. This air raid didn't cause much damage, but it was extremely insulting. Casimir's adjutant took a long time to come up with words to comfort His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. "He is still a child, don't bother with him." Casimir was choked and speechless. There was nothing he could do, as everyone knew that Duke Wessen's hair had not yet grown fully. Chapter 214. This time it's a big one. Many of the peasants had to wash their pots in boil water to prepare breakfast again. This time all of them covered their pots. The wind died down, and soon plumes of smoke rose straight into the air. Casimir sat in his tent, his face sullen, thinking quietly. He sensed something was amiss. Duke Wessen's behavior was too disjointed. The previous killing of the giant eagle knights, the ambush of the mage corps, and the childish, tantrum-like throwing of objects all appeared to be happening in the same person, creating a strange inconsistency. Casimir himself had been thrown into the battlefield as a child due to palace infighting, only to survive and rise to become a crown prince with military power. He understood the emotions of a man his age facing an unbeatable enemy. After much deliberation, he concluded that there were only two possibilities: either someone behind Duke Wessen was actually manipulating everything, or this idiot was just acting. The former was fine, as there were clues to what they were planning. The latter, however, warranted serious consideration, as it suggested Duke Wessen was plotting something. Casimir began to speculate on the enemy's intentions. He was overwhelmingly outnumbered, and the enemy, aware of this, had initially evacuated their territory, relying solely on minor interception attempts. From the initial ambush of the giant eagle knights, the traps set along the way, the ambush of the mage corps, and the occasional bombings from the sky, these tactics seemed more like intimidation, intended to dissuade them from facing the challenge. Another possibility was that they were simply putting on a show, achieving some success that would be easily reported to their superiors. He had seen this tactic many times, and his men had often used it to get by. Casimir concluded that Duke Wessen, or those behind him, knew the disparity in power was too great for a direct confrontation. So, they were evacuating their territory to reassure the local lords, while also offering sporadic resistance to report to their superiors. The bombings from the sky were similar, even the winged unicorns were deployed, making it difficult for their king to accuse them. Over breakfast, Casimir considered contacting Duke Wessen and sending him a squad of several hundred ant mercenaries to earn him merit, so he'd stop throwing things from the sky, or at least stop throwing horse manure. As for the giant eagle knights and the mages, they were gone. They were the king's men, not his princes. As long as he could plunder the western part of Hanma, some sacrifices were acceptable. For him, his cavalry regiments were his foundation. Most of these winged hussars came from his own territories and were completely loyal to him. Before he finished breakfast, shouts and curses rang out outside the tent. He knew Duke Wessen had returned. Casimir sighed, wishing he could grow wings and fly up to give him a beating. Behind Frederick were no longer rocks or anything like that, but magical incendiary bombs. From the air, he quickly located the horses' gathering point. The cavalry were feeding their horses, many looking up and cursing, while even more drew their shields. The first target of this airstrike was the winged hussars. He had been unable to locate their residence last night, and now the pest army was ready to depart. These elite cavalrymen were adorned with their signature metal wings, forming a forest the size of a football field from the air. The winged hussars were a family tradition. While most of them weren't small landowners, they were well-off farmers. The metal feathers, inscribed with various magical arrays, had been passed down through generations, accumulated over time. Frederick considered the concept of these wings highly advanced and worth learning from, but he wouldn't flaunt them like they did. He flew over 300 meters, a safe altitude where his bow and arrows were no longer effective. He threw 2 rocks, drawing a barrage of curses, and calculated his lead time. Dawn circled in the air, officially entering its bombing route. Frederick grabbed an incendiary bomb from behind him, set the detonation timer to 6 seconds, and gently dropped it from his position. He then dropped a second and third bomb, ensuring each point was within the range of the 2 bombs. Everyone watched the falling object, fearing it might hit them on the head. No one considered it a magical weapon, thinking it wasn't horse manure, and no one attempted to intercept it. 6 seconds was enough time for an incendiary bomb to free fall from a height of 300 meters to about 100 meters above the ground. Then, people saw several suns, white with a hint of blue, appear one after another 100 meters above the sky. Though only 3 or 4 meters in diameter, these suns were so dazzling that many nearby closed their eyes. A few breaths later, the suns exploded into a hail of fire, showering every corner of the surrounding area. The heart-wrenching neighing of nearly 1,000 war horses startled everyone. Casimir rushed out of the tent at the sound, immediately smelling the steeds of burning flesh. The blue-white magical flames quickly burned through the horses' skin and flesh, consuming them deeply. Within moments, the horses, barely touched by the flames, collapsed in agony. Some horses on the outskirts, frantic with pain, ran wildly through the camp, knocking over numerous men and tents. Experienced soldiers nearby quickly killed the horses with their weapons, lest the entire camp erupt in chaos. The winged hussars screamed in agony. Many initially tried to slap the flames away, but the flames quickly clung to their palms, transforming them into charred charcoal. Their armor couldn't withstand the flames for long. The flames, far exceeding the melting point of steel, quickly burned through them and ignited the lining, sending their bodies ablaze. Some activated the magic circles on the metal feathers on their backs. However, some of the shields protecting against external attacks were several meters away from the body, making them useless against the flames. Other shields, attached to the armor, bought their owners a moment, but soon collapsed from the overload. Some cavalrymen wearing ice armor thought they had escaped, but the contact of the two magical elements, ice and fire, caused an explosion. The rain of fire also ignited nearby haystacks, and within a few blinks, thick smoke billowed into the sky. However, they had made preparations the previous night to prevent a night attack, and many of them were engaged in putting out the fires. After spinning in the air, Frederick reached behind him and felt around. He still had a few incendiary bombs, so he threw them at the other war horses and pack horses. He slipped away. The internal purchase price of the magic incendiary bomb was 500 florins, equivalent to the family's annual starvation. He couldn't just throw them away. Before leaving, he vaguely heard someone on the ground shouting, "Wesson! Give me back my cavalry!" Chapter 215, One Battle Breaks 100,000. Frederick circled at low altitude and arrived at his command post on the hilltop north of the pasture. He picked up his binoculars and observed the enemy's movements while asking Helmut, "How is the enemy doing?" Helmut quickly replied, "The enemy cavalry is completely destroyed. They're currently rescuing the wounded and collecting the bodies. They marched all day yesterday, didn't sleep all night, and now they've been attacked on a large scale. They're probably exhausted both physically and mentally." Frederick nodded and said, "You'll be in command from now on. I'll just watch and not speak until the crucial moment." "Yes." Helmut was suddenly excited. Having joined the Wesson army only a year ago, he was given command of such a crucial battle. He felt the commander's trust in him. Frederick pulled up a stool near the observation post and sat down, quietly gazing at the enemy camp below. By the time the Piast army had finished cleaning up the scene, it was almost noon. No one dared to slack off. Even those who couldn't help would stand by and do their part, lest they become the crown prince's scapegoat. Casimir's face was terribly gloomy, and he stood there silently, like a pressure cooker on fire, its inner pressure simmering with immense intensity, ready to explode at any moment. The statistics were in. Less than half of the 1,000 winged hussars were still combat-ready, and just over 300 of the 2,000 light cavalry were still serviceable. Half the baggage-drawing pack horses were gone. The losses were devastating. "Gather all edible horse meat," Casimir ordered gravely. "Everyone, eat a full meal of horse meat at noon, then sleep. Eat again in the evening, and march through the night." The surrounding nobles and generals hesitated, but none dared to object. Seeing them like this, Casimir said, "Such weapons cannot be bought without thousands of gold coins, and it is impossible to buy many even if you have money. Don't worry that they will continue to use them. Duke Wesson didn't want to make enemies with us from the beginning. He just killed Montescaris and let us leave. Otherwise, such weapons will fall on your heads. Your tents are easy to recognize. Now we are competing with him to see who can act more resolutely. Now is the 6th. As long as we rush over, we will win if we reach the city of Hanma on the 10th. It was originally agreed that you would have 3 days of freedom in Hanma City, but now I decide to give you 10 days. I will deal with the kingdom of Danma. This battle has been a huge loss for him so far. Now there are 2 ways to go. One is to stop the loss in time and retreat immediately, but in this way, the alliance agreement with the kingdom of Danma will be ruined, and he cannot accept this loss. The other way is to keep going. As long as they can capture Hanma City together with the kingdom of Danma, the economic losses can be recovered, and the political benefits of forming an alliance with the kingdom of Danma will be even greater. The prospect of 7 more days of looting in the prosperous city of Hanma was a tempting prospect for the lords, both large and small, who had come from all over. Accepting the limited availability of these magical weapons, they quickly followed Casimir's orders. Casimir was right about Frederick not having many of these magical incendiary bombs, but he was unaware of the other supplies he possessed. He also made a mistake. As the area surrounding the camp was open, by not sending scouts to the surrounding hills. At noon, the faint smell of cooking horse meat could be smelled from the hilltops, while Frederick and his men prepared instant noodles, which smelled of tomato and beef. Frederick ate silently, watching Helmut scrambling over his map while he ate, and shook his head slightly. The original plan for this battle was to attack when the enemy began to break camp or when they were soundly asleep after an hour's rest. Helmut had given his orders accordingly. Just now, while the pissed army was watching and rescuing the bombing site, many people had gathered. An attack at that moment would have inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy, perhaps the final straw that broke their nerves. However, Helmut hadn't seized this opportunity. Frederick believed that Helmut was adept at planning and executing procedures, but his ability to grasp battlefield opportunities was lacking. He was more suited to being a staff officer than a commander. At 1 p.m. on November 6, the Wesson army began to advance. At 1:10 p.m., Casimir was awakened by his adjutant. "The Duke of Wesson is here?" With only 800 men, Casimir rubbed his head. It felt like he had been in bed for less than half an hour. Was he dreaming? The adjutant replied, "He is indeed here," and with only 800 men, Casimir fell silent. Although his own side had suffered heavy losses, it still had an army of 100,000. What could such a small number of men do? "Is he here to negotiate?" Casimir said. "Never mind. I'll just take 10,000 men and scare them to death." Suddenly, a flash of inspiration struck him. Shaking his head, he said, "Oh, I was careless. I didn't send out scouts. He might have mobilized troops from somewhere. I remember they had a group holding a tournament in the north. If they were summoned and suddenly charged from behind, I wouldn't be able to handle it." No wonder he couldn't detect these people after he eliminated the giant eagle knights. He couldn't put out the fire after he eliminated the mages. He couldn't stop the knights after he eliminated the cavalry. It turned out to be a calculated plan. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that this was Frederick's plan. These few hundred men were just a cover, appearing to be for negotiations. In reality, the heavy cavalry might be hiding somewhere, preparing for a surprise attack. In that era, heavy cavalry was the deciding factor in a war. A single charge could tip the scales. "Attack," Casimir ordered immediately. "Form a tight circle to prevent a sudden attack by heavy cavalry." The best way for infantry to deal with heavy cavalry was to use a dense formation to halt them, then attack the horses' legs first and then the soldiers. The soldiers, who had just retired to sleep, were called back to life. Frederick and Helmut's judgment was miscalculated. They expected the enemy's morale to plummet after being repeatedly tormented. Unexpectedly, upon hearing that it was the Duke of Wesson, the man who had been throwing horse manure from the sky, their morale increased by 100, boosted by their morning grumpiness. Frederick was startled by the pissed army's reaction. Initially, he had expected only a few thousand or 10,000 men to scare him, but they had come out in full force, even recruiting peasants. The soldiers, forming an all-around defensive circle, appeared extremely cautious. And their exceptionally high morale significantly improved Frederick's opinion of Casimir. Tony whispered to Frederick. The deputy chief of staff asked if we should proceed as planned. Frederick was frustrated. Why bother asking in this situation? So he calmly said, "Focus on those people." Immediately, he decided that Helmut should continue his career in the staff system. Casimir saw Duke Wesson riding the winged unicorn, standing under the golden double-headed eagle. Surrounding him were indeed only 800 men, some of whom stood on the carriages on either side, covered by something. The large-eyed masks reminded him of certain rumors. He glanced at the surrounding army and ordered his troops to slowly advance. In a previous life, Frederick had seen hundreds of thousands of people gathered in the square in front of the train station during the spring festival travel rush. He had been astonished then. Now, seeing so many people coming in anger to attack him was even more shocking. A minute later, a sudden roar echoed from the hills surrounding the ranch. The first rocket launched was a rocket propelled by black powder and charged with angina pectoris. These rockets, about the size of a human leg, carried a 5-kilogram charge and were equipped with fins for directional control. They trailed a trail of white smoke as they flew towards the enemy. This time, Bruce had brought 20 12-barrel launchers, each with a capacity for 5 salvos. In less than 15 minutes, 1,200 rockets rained down upon the Piast army. While their accuracy was limited, their uniform distribution was effective. Huge orange-red fireballs and sweeping shrapnel left blood-stained clearings in the enemy formations. Simultaneously, volleys of super-caliber mortar shells blasted from behind Frederick's platoon, joining the slaughter. The original plan was for Frederick to decapitate the enemy leader with a mortar attack, while rockets rained down upon the camp. The next move depended on the enemy's continued days. The heavy casualties threw the Piast army into chaos. Frederick acted decisively, ordering the mortars to extend their fire, the infantry around him to advance, and the muskets to move forward to encircle the enemy from both flanks. The triple-barreled P guns brought from Wesson were mounted on horse-drawn carts, allowing them to be quickly deployed to unleash devastating fire on the enemy's flanks and rear. The unprecedented onslaught left Casimir's mind blank, unsure whether to advance or retreat. A mortar shell exploded not far from him, its shrapnel blocked by the guards nearby, but the shockwave stunned him. The surviving guards, seeing the situation dire, immediately pulled his horse back. The endless death toll crushed the Piast army's morale, and almost instantly, everyone turned and fled. Their single goal, east, home. Frederick led his men in the rear, driving them back to prevent them from gathering. A few who remained to launch a counterattack were quickly cut down by the P guns and mortars. The defeated army fled eastward and reached the Elbe River in the evening. The pontoon bridge on the river was destroyed by the cavalry company that arrived earlier, and the defeated soldiers had no choice but to swim across the river. The river water was very cold now, and many people had not rested well. After running for a long time, they sank into the river due to leg cramps and exhaustion. In the end, only a small number of people were able to cross the river. At night, the North Sea began to rise, and seawater began to flow back from the estuary. The water in the nearby river suddenly rose, and not only did the river become wider, but the floating corpses stopped floating down. Casimir was lucky. They rode horses to cross the river safely. When Casimir woke up, he saw the corpses floating on the river and fainted again. Frederick was not in a good situation either. He had to take his men to drive out the people who fled into the forest overnight, otherwise the specialty of Wesson County would be bandits. Chapter 216 Let's Make Money After the War. Hammer had a traditional food court. Every Sunday, before dawn, people would gather at the fish market at the mouth of the Elbe River for a hearty seafood breakfast, then attend church for a group gathering. This tradition dates back over a century, but for an entire month, starting on November 7, 1027, almost no one in Hammer ate fish. For 2 days, bodies drifting down from Wessenland blocked the estuary, including those of the former mayor of Hammer and several high-ranking officials. Finally, heavy rain upstream caused the river to swell, flushing the bodies into the sea. After the battle, Frederick retreated to his home, preferring to remain isolated, rather than participate in the political drama of Hammer. He even stayed out during the vibrant harvest festival. The king of the Danmark kingdom was killed in battle, but many high-ranking nobles were captured, and they exposed the city's traitors. Consequently, the Grand Duke of Mainz, the Grand Duke of Bane, the Count of Delden, and the royal mages took action to apprehend and execute these traitors. Meanwhile, all the Danmark merchants in the city were accomplices. Ultimately, they were driven out, leaving behind only their clothes and all their possessions. No one cared if they were wrongly accused. Wars like that, losers lose everything, winners take all. Then came the joyous confiscation of property and the distribution of the spoils. Frederick ignored these matters, but the plan and list of spoils were presented to him first, and everyone unanimously decided to let him choose first. He was now famous. His feat of defeating a 100,000-man Piast army with 800 men and beheading the Danmark king Valdemar in battle had spread far and wide, and his fame spread far and wide through the merchants. The former's body was evidenced by the bodies of the defeated Piasts on the Elbe River and the Piasts' fleeing soldiers. The latter's body was still in Hammer, guarded by captured Danmark nobles, awaiting the ransom from home. Frederick pondered the list and sent for Schupaya, the president of the Guild Alliance. Schupaya was overwhelmed with emotions when he met Frederick. He had initially sought the position of Minister of Commerce in Wesson, aligning himself with numerous merchants from Hammer city. He hadn't anticipated that the Duke of Wesson would ultimately favor a foreign scholar. Frederick had no desire for a businessman like him, with his own faction, to bring his people to a high-ranking position in his territory. Wesson was still weak and vulnerable to internal strife. However, they could still do business together. Frederick first apologized to Shupeia. "I'm deeply sorry that I had to leave your invitation midway, causing you great difficulty." Shupeia quickly replied, "No need to apologize. Your Excellency saved us, otherwise, we would have been robbed by bandits." After exchanging a few pleasantries, Frederick suddenly asked, "I heard your guild alliance is on the verge of collapse. Could you sell it to me?" Shupeia was unprepared for the question. Initially, he thought he was seeking information about the distribution of the spoils. After all, he knew which of the confiscated properties were the most valuable. Frederick continued, "The guild alliance is no longer the vast alliance it once was, with nearly 200 member cities, capable of influencing political dynamics. It's now a mere commercial organization, providing shops selling goods, storage warehouses, and merchant inns in less than 10 cities. Am I right?" Shupeia nodded bitterly. He didn't need anyone to leak these secrets, he could just ask a merchant. Frederick continued, "I'm interested in getting involved in maritime trade. Rather than starting from scratch, I'd like to buy out your business along with its skilled employees. If you're willing to work for me after selling the guild alliance, I'll double your salary and any commissions." Shupeia pondered. If Duke Wesson wanted to get involved in maritime commerce, he'd need a team of professionals familiar with the business. Since he was a professional, he could also recruit more professionals. He'd long considered leaving the guild alliance. Since he couldn't become the Minister of Commerce for Wesson State, working for the same boss wasn't bad, and this boss seemed quite powerful. "I accept the Duke's kindness," Shupeia replied, "but the guild alliance's business has been shrinking, and they are losing so much that they can barely pay their employees. If you want to get involved in maritime business, I suggest starting over. I can also recommend a number of experienced employees." Frederick understood what he meant and said with a smile, "The Guild Alliance has a long history and stores a large amount of information on maritime trade." Shupeia nodded in agreement. The Guild Alliance's archive contained hundreds of years of information, comparable to a library. It has now become a place where the organization's top brass collect their salaries. Frederick then said bluntly, "It's this information that I'm interested in. It's useless in your hands, but in my hands it will become a gold mine." Ah, Shupeia was shocked. "Really? Then how do we do it?" Frederick just smiled and said nothing. Shupeia immediately said, "I apologize for my slip of the tongue. Although I'm the president, selling the Guild Alliance isn't my decision. I need to discuss it with everyone." Frederick nodded slightly and said, "I'll give you 3 days to discuss it. Make me an offer. You can choose in gold coins or from my spoils. If the original members are willing to work under me, I'll increase their salary by 30% initially. If you think you can earn more, you can convince me. However, you must also follow my rules." He raised his hand and gestured. Immediately, a maid brought Shupeia a tray with a manual titled Wesson Family Property Management System. Shupeia left with a manual and returned 2 days later with a dozen people. These people were shareholders of the Guild Alliance, and their offer was within Frederick's acceptable range. The Guild Alliance was now a money loser, so a takeover would be ideal, not to mention the possibility of exchanging it for assets in Hanma City. The city of Hanma has recently been embroiled in a fierce battle over a new mayor, bringing city administration to a near standstill. However, no one dared to neglect Duke Wesson's purchase of the Guild Alliance, and the relevant procedures were completed with utmost vigor. The once glorious Guild Alliance, centuries old, officially disbanded in November 1027, replaced by the Wesson family's Dawn merchants, symbolized by Duke Wesson's mount, Dawn. This matter has ignited widespread discussion in Hanma, with many believing Duke Wesson had been swindled, believing maritime trade was easy, and thus purchased a dilapidated house for his own amusement. As the saying goes, every trade has its specialties. Proficiency in warfare doesn't necessarily translate to shrewdness in business, and many were waiting to see the joke. These rumors naturally reached Frederick, but he paid no heed and instead began to develop his maritime industry. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217 Business at Sea. The first task assigned to Shupeia, president of the Dawn Chamber of Commerce, was to recruit someone to clean up the archives of the former Guild Alliance and organize all the materials into categories. On the first day of December, Shupaia arrived at Frederick's home to report on his work. Someone else was there, a burgundy-haired scholar, chatting and laughing with Frederick. Foreign Minister Christian, smiling beside him, provided the atmosphere and helped pour tea. Frederick smiled as he introduced the two men, but Shupaia felt a pang of bitterness in his heart, for the man before him was Professor Adam, the new Minister of Commerce of the state of Wesson. Professor Adam had no idea that the man in front of him had once coveted his position. When he saw that it was his new boss's subordinate, he smiled and said, "It turns out to be Lord Shupaia. I have heard of you before, now you are the president of the Dawn Chamber of Commerce. I just heard about the arrangements your excellency has made for you. It really opened my eyes. I believe that in the near future, your name will spread to every port with Duke Wesson." Shupaia was also a man who had seen many storms. He had adjusted his mentality long ago and said in a friendly manner, "In appreciation of your good wishes, I am just a soldier fighting on the sea under the command of Duke Wesson." After they finished their polite exchanges, Frederick said to Shupaia, "I heard that many businessmen in Hama City want to invest in Wesson State. I will let Professor Adam take charge of this matter, and you and Christian will assist." Shupaia suddenly became depressed, but still took the order. Frederick picked up the teacup and took a sip of hot tea, then said, "The Dawn Chamber of Commerce will have new business next, Shupaia. I remember that collecting and selling prices of important goods in various ports and delivering messages were once one of the businesses of the Guild Alliance, right?" Shupaia immediately replied, "Yes, this business is still going on. The Guild Alliance used to provide delivery services between more than 100 cities and monthly commodity price updates. Now we can provide services between the Rhine River Basin, Hama City and several ports in the north." Frederick nodded and asked him, "Have you heard of the radio in Wesson?" Shupaia's eyes lit up, and he immediately replied, "I have heard many businessmen say that you are going to let the Chamber of Commerce run this business." Frederick nodded and said, "Yes, I plan to first cooperate with local authorities to establish radio stations in major ports in the North Sea. At sea, radio can be used to determine the location of ships." He then repeated the radio positioning system that he had discussed with Professor Heinrich. Shupaia's eyes widened as he listened, and he asked in disbelief, "Is this true?" Frederick replied angrily, "Why would I lie to you? You're not a beauty. Next spring, when Heinrich arrives with some equipment, you'll need to help him build radio stations in the port cities of Hammersmith, Bremen, and Schwanstein, while also testing the positioning system. You'll be responsible for selling the radios in these 3 locations." Shupaia had inquired about the work styles of higher-ranking officials in Wesson and had already learned to wear suits and carry a thermos around. He immediately wrote it down in his notebook. Seeing that he was still using a dip pen, Frederick figured that since no one had yet developed a fountain pen or pencil, he might as well invent one himself someday. After Shupaia finished recording, he said, "If maritime positioning can truly be achieved, I believe every ship at sea will buy it." Frederick said, "Of course. Professor Heinrich and I are looking forward to making money from this. The broadcast system can be improved to transmit information. Professor Heinrich has already developed a device that can transmit messages, and this time we've brought it with us to set up stations in Hama and Bremen, allowing for rapid communication between the 2 cities. If this system works, someone can send a message in Hama in the morning, and Bremen will receive it immediately, and the message will be delivered to the designated person the next day. Similarly, commodity price information can be transmitted this way. Once the experiment is successful, it will be up to you to build a communications network covering the North Sea and even further." Shupaia's expression gradually changed from surprise to excitement, and he said excitedly, "If this experiment is successful, there's so much we can do." Frederick said calmly, "Don't be too excited yet. There are many difficulties. When Professor Heinrich arrives next year, you and he will slowly study it. He will be busy here for the next few years. The initial investment for this project is enormous. I'll send someone to deliver the money. Remember to clean the treasury." Shupaia replied solemnly, "The advantage of the Guild Alliance treasury in the past was its cleanliness." Professor Adam then remarked, "An overfilled treasury isn't a good thing either. Money needs to circulate to be valuable." Frederick echoed this, then asked Shupaia, "Are you familiar with insurance?" Shupaia said with some alarm, "You want to get involved in insurance? It's too dangerous. It's like gambling. If something goes wrong, you'll lose everything." Frederick curled his lips and said disdainfully, "You think I don't know how you deal in insurance? You're just too stupid. You only gamble on whether the ship will return safely. Insurance in those days was very primitive. The captain would find a wealthy person and deposit a sum of money with them before setting sail. If the ship returned safely, the money would belong to the wealthy person. If something went wrong, the wealthy person would compensate for the losses. As Chopin had said, it was like gambling. If you won, you got the money. If you lost, you lost. Frederick picked up the teacup and took a sip slowly, then said confidently, "That's because they won't do it, but I'm different. Let me ask you, among the several fixed routes between Hama City and the north, how many ships are there each year, how many ships have accidents, and how many shipwrecks are there on average for every 100 trips out to sea?" Chupin thought for a long time before answering. These fixed routes are already very mature. If there's 100 trips, there will be less than one shipwreck, Frederick said seriously. Let's make an assumption. There are 100 ships, each of which is worth 1,000 florins including the ship and cargo. We charge 3% insurance premium for each ship. If a ship sinks, we compensate? How much will our income be in the end? Chupin figured it out quickly, and the answer made his face twitch. But, he said hesitantly, this just goes from a 1-on-1 bet to a 1-on-100. Frederick shook his head and said, this isn't a blind bet, but a conclusion based on data analysis. That's why I say the Guild Alliance's data is a gold mine. You should calculate the proportion of shipwrecks, as well as the key factors that lead to them and their proportions, especially the data from recent years. Use this data to determine insurance premiums for different situations. There's no rush. We can try it step by step. Also, we can recruit some mathematical scholars to work for the Chamber of Commerce at high salaries. Our decisions will be based on data, not assumptions. His knowledge of the insurance industry was limited, primarily regarding the mathematical foundations of probability theory and the law of large numbers. The most he knew was that the Poisson distribution seemed related to the law of large numbers, and that it and the Poisson spot were coined by the same person. All he could do now was to explore bit by bit, hoping to advance related mathematical research. Chupin hesitated, saying, I need to think about this carefully. He pondered for nearly half an hour. Frederick and Professor Adam didn't interrupt him, continuing their discussion in low voices about the relationship between market size and division of labor. Ultimately, Chupin decided to test the waters with a few routes, and Frederick let him make his own decision. By the way, Frederick stopped Chupin before he left. What do you think about digging a canal north of Hammer, bypassing the Sembrica Peninsula, and charging tolls? Would that be profitable? Chupin paused, then thought for a moment and said, if such a canal existed, many ships would surely pass through it. Frederick then had a map brought to Chupin and said, go and discuss this with the merchants. Quickly. If it's feasible, I'll include it in the negotiations. Chapter 218. Are you here to declare war? December. Post-war negotiations between the Rhine Confederation and the kingdoms of Denmark and Pis took place in Hammer. The Rhine Confederation was led by Crown Prince Rudolf, but he served only as a figurehead. Professional matters were handled by professionals. Princess Margaret of Denmark came in person. Once the king's remains were redeemed, she would become Queen Margaret. The Pists were more discreet, with only a minister present, primarily to redeem the remains of the nobles killed in the battle. The main negotiating parties remained the Rhine Confederation and Denmark. The Rhine Confederation's royal mages and the combined forces of nobles still occupied Flensburg in Denmark. Frederick simply told Christian to look after his share of the spoils and then retreated to a manor west of the city. After purchasing the Guild Alliance, he still had a significant share of his spoils, which he used to acquire a number of connected farms, exchange some with others, and eventually consolidate them into a single, large manor for greenhouse vegetable cultivation. Now, he was hands-off. The estate was managed by Helmut's parents and younger brother. He spent his mornings studying under Psyche, his afternoons trying to figure out calculus, and his evenings dreaming up new inventions. After more than a dozen days of this, Christian cautiously arrived at the estate. Frederick, who was practicing the basics of swordsmanship, turned to look at him and calmly asked, failed? Christian nodded sadly. Frederick said nonchalantly, so what? It's just a canal. It's not my fault. He was prepared for the possibility of a failed negotiation. After all, a canal zone hundreds of kilometers long and 20 kilometers wide wasn't something he could easily secure. Christian whispered, they're willing to grant you duty-free trading rights in all ports in the Kingdom of Denmark. Frederick continued swinging his sword and asked, how long is the time limit? Christian replied, 99 years. Frederick thought for a moment and said, I agree in principle. You should discuss the details with Shupahia and try to squeeze out as much profit as possible. Christian added, Sir, many people have invited you to banquets recently, including Princess Margaret. Frederick shook his head and continued practicing. There were too many people in Hammer seeking to join him these days. He had previously attended a cocktail party where boasters lined up in long lines, and a fight broke out over someone cutting in line. So, for now, he remained aloof from worldly affairs. Those seeking to join the army first passed an interview. Those seeking military service were handled by Gerhard, who had agreed to become vice president of the military academy. Those who thought they could excel in business were screened by Shupahia. Academics spoke with Professor Adam. Those interested in politics went to Wessenland to take the civil service exam. After passing the first round, they would be interviewed by Psyche, a human-like lie detector. Finally, Frederick would take the third round. However, even though he didn't want to see anyone, someone approached him. Let's have a spar. Princess Margaret, arriving uninvited, saw Frederick practicing and drew a slender rapier from her waist. Frederick turned to glance at Psyche with a gloomy expression. Only she could allow outsiders to come directly here. Psyche seemed particularly interested in the sky, looking up to study the non-existent clouds. Go ahead, Margaret said, waving her sword to familiarize herself, looking quite competent. Pretend this is a battlefield. Frederick frowned slightly, sizing him up. Margaret was about 16 years old, of average height. She was wearing thick winter clothes, so it was hard to tell what she looked like. Her long red gold hair suggested she had northern ancestry. Frederick looked at the weapon in her hand, then at his own, and sighed deeply. Margaret was a little angry when she saw him sigh, and said angrily, Do you look down on me? Let me see what kind of person killed my father. Frederick turned to look at a knight who came with Margaret. This person's strength was probably not inferior to Richardnal. He said to him a little depressedly, You must be Sir Preben. I have heard the master mention you before. What do you think we should do now? Margaret's anger increased even more, and she said to Frederick angrily, Do you look down on me? If you want to fight with Teacher Preben, you must defeat me first. If you defeat me, I will ask you to do anything. Preben suddenly covered his face and said to Frederick, Please be gentle for the sake of my sister-in-law Psyche and Richardnal who went on an adventure in the north with me. Teacher, Margaret stomped her feet in anger after hearing this. How can you say such a thing? Psyche turned to Preben and asked, This work is very hard, right? Preben replied calmly, The salary is high. Psyche said again, But it seems that you didn't teach them well. Preben said helplessly, It's a talent issue. There's nothing I can do about it, Psyche said. It looks like you'll be working hard in the future. Why not just change jobs? Preben replied seriously, She gave me a raise. I see. Psyche nodded. Oh, the fight's over. As they chatted, Frederick struck first. Seeing Frederick charging towards her, Margaret immediately took a stance, thrusting her rapier straight at his throat. The thrust was executed with impeccable precision, maximizing her full strength and delivering a deadly strike. Margaret suddenly felt a sharp pain in her hand as the rapier was knocked out of her hand by Frederick's axe. His face instantly appeared before her. Frederick charged, almost face to face, and delivered an uppercut that knocked her breakfast out. Before either side achieves an overwhelming advantage in either strength or speed, the heavier weapon holds a significant advantage in close combat. Frederick had recently been learning to wield a battle axe. Firstly, to familiarize himself with the weapon's characteristics so he'd have a better idea of how to deal with enemies wielding it, and secondly, to at least master the basics, which might come in handy someday. Margaret's rapier was a beautiful sight, a martial art suited to a young woman, but it was no match for the axe. I'll fight you, the unbearable princess lunged at Frederick, her hands reaching out to strangle him. Psyche shook her head and said to Preben, You, the student of your teacher, can't even stand losing. Preben, gazing at the blue sky, said calmly, I'll retire after these few years and change my name. Frederick approached and asked Preben, puzzled, Are you here to declare war? Behind him, Margaret was knocked to the ground, a black eye visible, and her legs tied in a horse's legged position with a belt. Frederick, her father's murderer, naturally wouldn't hold back. But since they'd agreed not to resort to heavy-handed tactics, he had to tie her up. Preben's face darkened, and after a long pause, he stammered, Actually, we're here to seek cooperation. Do you believe us? Frederick frowned, asking, Would you believe me if you were me? Preben gave an awkward smile, then rolled his eyes and asked, "How about I have her wash and put her in your bedroom so you can vent your anger?" Frederick rolled his eyes. "Would you treat your future queen like this?" he asked, frowning. "Is she fake?" Prabin's face suddenly turned bitter, and he sighed. "There's nothing we can do. His Majesty Valdemar is gone, and the Piast Kingdom has been crippled by you. Those pagans are coming for us." Chapter 219. I'm too lazy to cooperate with you. The Danmar Kingdom encompassed not only the Sembrica Peninsula but also numerous islands to the east, and the cohesion among its nobles was as strong as a beach. A king like Valdemar had finally united the nobility, only to be killed in battle. For years, these nobles had listened to Valdemar not only for his military prowess but also because the kingdom of Svirii, a cult of the Church of Nature, in the dark lands north of the sea, had been steadily encroaching southward, and they needed a strong leader. Valdemar had fought the northern Darklands, rallying factions against each other and cooperating with the Piast Kingdom in the south to stem the Svirii's advances. Now that he was dead, the Piast Kingdom was crippled, and the Svirii immediately threatened to invade southward. Consequently, the Danmar nobles panicked and sought every possible means of support, including seeking help from Duke Wesson. Preben hadn't been kidding when he told Margaret to clean Frederick's bedroom. He was now the spokesperson for the nobles, and he spoke frankly to Margaret. "For you nobles, a good king is one who protects his king, whether the king is personally winning victories on the battlefield or recruiting help from his mistresses." Margaret, likely hearing this before, didn't lose her temper. She bit her lip and shoveled the dirt silently. Frederick remained silent for a long time, staring at the drainage ditch beside the vegetable greenhouse that led to the distant river. "There are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests," he said calmly. "I've seen that." Preben nodded and said, "That's a good summary." Frederick smiled and asked, "What can you give me? Cookies, mink fur, or pork?" Preben's expression was interesting, and he glanced at Margaret beside him. Frederick saw this and shook his head, saying, "She's no good. She's worked for half a day and can't even dig a 2-meter ditch." "What a waste of food." Margaret bit her lip so angrily that it bled. Preben helplessly asked Frederick, "What do you want?" Frederick firmly replied, "I won't send any troops. I don't have the numbers. If I had more men, how could you expect to reclaim Flensburg?" He had made a killing from this battle. The captured Piast military supplies alone have kept the Dawn merchants busy to this day, not to mention the various ransoms and war reparations. But no one wants to be too rich. If Frederick had the time, he would surely capture 1 or 2 Danmar cities and make a killing. Danmar was only facing the threat of war, not a real attack from the north, so those nobles dared to resort to trickery by using Margaret to pay off their debts. If they had offered real money from the start, Frederick would have sold them the captured weapons. Now, there was no need to think about it, they were just waiting to be robbed. Preben had been brought here by Psyche, and Frederick had to show some respect to her. It wouldn't be a good idea to just turn him away. So Frederick glanced at the sky and said to Preben, "Since you're here, let's eat before we go." Preben knew his plan was over, but he had another question. He asked Frederick, "Duke of Wesson, do you have the royal ring of His Majesty Valdemar?" Frederick had taken the ring, his personal rings, his sword, and other items when he collected the spoils, expecting a large ransom. He asked Preben, "Why, do you want to wear it back?" No. Preben shook his head hastily. "I don't have that idea. I just want to wake up and get paid, not worry about how to pay people." Frederick said, "Anyone who wants it can come to me." With that, he turned and left. "Alice," Preben glanced at Margaret and said to Psyche, "Comparisons are always frustrating. I really envy Rich Ardner." Psyche said, "Actually, Frederick is easy to talk to, but only if he doesn't play dirty tricks." Preben cried out in indignation, "I know you're his teacher, so how dare I play dirty tricks? If I piss you off, and you lock my treasury, I'll be doomed." Frederick returned to his residence and went to his study to find a map of the Danmar Kingdom and began studying it. The Danmar Kingdom wasn't rich in resources, with few minerals, but it did have a well-developed fishing industry. The mink fur raised there was of high quality and was a major export. Altasia brought Frederick some tea and pointed to the small icon in the upper left corner of the map. "Why don't you just take over their territory on Cod Island?" Frederick was stunned and asked in confusion, "Isn't Cod Island part of your Green Island territory?" Altasia replied, "The north is ours, and the south is theirs. There are many volcanoes there, and we can mine a lot of fire magic crystals." Frederick shook his head and said, That's even more impossible. How could they give up a place with magic crystal mines? Altasia handed Frederick the teacup and said, fire magic crystals are not that easy to mine. It requires high skills, otherwise people will die. They don't have the skills, so they can only try their luck in the mountains to pick up some. Frederick asked, you mean you have the skills and want to work with me? Yes, Altasia said. I can find people from Green Island to dig them, and we'll split the profits then. Teacher Psyche recently helped me improve one of my spells, and I need a lot of fire magic crystals as research material. Frederick smiled and said, I might as well take over the entire island. Whatever, Artasia said nonchalantly. Green Island thinks Cod Island is useless anyway, and they've dumped a lot of exiled prisoners there. If you do take it, the worst that can happen is I'll just be living here like Teacher Psyche. Frederick was speechless with his sister. That's all, Frederick said, looking at the map. When Margaret comes, tell her to come to my study. Artasia asked him, looking at the bad news, do you want me to get everyone out of the house? The soundproofing here is poor. Frederick was puzzled when Artasia smiled like an ant. Oh, our master's hair is starting to grow back. Go away. Frederick, remembering how she teased him in the bath 2 days ago, became angry. If you keep saying that, I'll make you dinner well. Artasia smiled and left. Frederick sipped his tea in silence. He had never expected this sister to have such a side. After a while, Margaret washed her hands and face and came to the study. Hurry up and return my father's ring and sword, she continued to speak with such aggression. Frederick sullenly said, if I don't, they're my trophies. I'll throw them into the sea. Margaret's face suddenly darkened, and she threatened to strike again. Frederick wasn't going to tolerate her. He pinned her against the desk, lowered her defenses, and brought her palm down hard on her scathing gluteus maximus. You can't talk, huh? Frederick scolded as he struck her. You're the one begging me now, not me. Think carefully about how to speak when you're asking for help. During this battle at the Bastion, a technician from the Springfield Arsenal personally operated a triple-barreled P-gun to obtain first-hand data. He was a promising young man, but he perished alongside the enemy. Naturally, Frederick had no good opinion of the Danmark kingdom. Furthermore, Margaret had been pampered from childhood and had never been beaten. Otherwise, her repeated misconduct wouldn't have infuriated Frederick to the point of losing control. Frederick's behavior frightened Margaret. The pain brought her back to her senses and she burst into tears. She hadn't cried so hard even when she learned her father had died in battle. The more she cried, the angrier Frederick became, and the harder he hid her. However, as they beat her, Margaret's voice suddenly became strange, and Frederick became even angrier, hitting her even harder than before. Chapter 220. A revolving lantern appears. The Kingdom of Danmark leased the southern portion of Cod Island to Duke Wesson for 499 years without public notice. All negotiations and deals were conducted privately, leaving no one privy to the details. Post-war negotiations concluded before the new year. The ransoms and compensation were paid, and everyone returned home, some weeping, others laughing. In the following days, the taverns and other establishments in Hammer City saw a surge in revenue. While the masters ate meat, their men also enjoyed their broth. The bounties naturally boosted local consumption. The Wesson army was no exception. Frederick gave them rotating holidays to spend their time in the city. As a result, many of them abducted local women, intending to bring them back to Wesson for marriage. Frederick received a pile of reports. He had Helmut compile a list of the women and hand it over to Shupahia for investigation. Those with 3 generations of clean criminal records and no gambling history were accepted. Several professional gamblers were subsequently identified. Soon after, heavy snow began to fall, continuing from the Winter Soul Festival of 1027 until the second day of 1028. When the snow stopped, the land was completely covered in white. That morning, the sun shone brightly on the snow, almost blinding. Those who needed to go out tied a piece of linen cloth over their eyes to block the glare. Frederick, wearing sunglasses, opened the door to find the snow outside nearly chest high. Tony was shoveling the snow, fresh from the day before, from the road. Ever since the snow began, he had lived in a small house, less than 100 square meters. Though small, it was well equipped, with double walls and floors, and a fire burning in the back stove kept the whole place warm. Every manor had 1 or 2 such houses, and now, in addition to Frederick and his companions, Dawn and the other unicorns also lived there. The farmer's house was far worse off. Frederick had visited, and found no double walls or floors, leaving the family shivering around the fire pit. So, starting this year, kangs became available. It's easy to tell who invented them. Frederick arrived at Psyche's place and found her lazily sprawled on her bed, a lollipop in her mouth, reading a book. "What are you reading?" Frederick asked curiously, sitting beside her. Psyche handed him the thick volume and said, "It's a sea adventure novel by someone I used to know. He only wrote 3 volumes. I visited him a while ago, but he passed away 3 years ago. Before he died, he wrote 2 more volumes and revised the first 3. His descendants asked me to take it to Wessenland for publication." Frederick took the book and flipped through it. It told the story of a captain whose ship is frequently blown off course by strong winds and lands on strange islands. He then defeats a princess and rescues rare animals. As for why the princess is defeated, the battles are unspeakable. But aside from the battle part, it looks quite good. Frederick handed Psyche the thick volume he had brought and began to study the novel carefully. He would need it in 4 years. "You actually remember so much?" Psyche flipped through the book in surprise. "I thought you could just come up with the most basic functions and derivatives and give a few examples," Frederick replied. "I have a question. A few days ago, it was like a box suddenly opened in my brain, and a lot of memories that I thought I had forgotten came out. Like this. At first, I thought I only remembered a little, but suddenly I found that I could actually recall the entire advanced mathematics textbook from that year. What's going on? It's more than that. My colleague's daughter stole grapes from my desk, and I remember it. Now I can remember how many grapes there were before she stole them, and how many were left afterward. Don't you think it's strange?" Psyche raised her head and gave him a depressed look. She said seriously, "This is a revolving lantern before death. There's no cure. Wait for death? Goodbye," Frederick said helplessly. "Stop joking. Is what you said true? Don't scare me." Psyche became serious this time and said to him, "The principle is the same. Some people have extremely strong mental strength before they die, some are in a last-ditch effort, and some know they are in great danger, so their minds are unprecedentedly concentrated under the action of instinct, which stimulates the memory part and awakens previous memories. This kind of thing doesn't just happen before death, it also happens occasionally when the attention is particularly concentrated beyond a certain critical point, but the stimulation is not great and the impact is limited." "Were you stimulated at that time?" Frederick shook his head. He was not stimulated at all at that time. Psyche thought about it, then suddenly grinned wickedly and asked him stealthily, "Did you eat the forbidden fruit a while ago?" "Some people may also experience this through human stimulation." Frederick rolled his eyes at her and said helplessly, "Don't gossip with people all day long. I still have some self-control, who knows?" Psyche looked as if she saw through him. Margaret almost couldn't sit on the chair after coming out of the study that day. Frederick was silent for a moment, thinking that Psyche was not a person who talked nonsense, so he said, "If I tell you that she is a masochist, would you believe it?" The corners of Psyche's mouth twitched slightly, and she sighed. "You young people are really playing around. Let's not talk about this." Frederick didn't want to continue the topic. "I think this is a bit abnormal," Psyche replied. "Your appearance is abnormal. There is too little information to analyze, and I don't know what's going on. Wait and see. If this happens again in the future, remember to recall what happened before, okay?" Frederick said, shaking his head. "Last time, I fell and hit my head. This time, there's no sign at all," Psyche suggested. "How about you have Dawn kick me?" Frederick shook his head hastily. Psyche didn't continue the conversation, snatching the novel from his hand. "Whatever you're busy with, finish it over the winter. I plan to start teaching you combat magic in the spring." "Really?" Frederick jumped for joy. That's fantastic. He'd spent the past few years learning the basics of elemental manipulation. Besides the elemental collision spell, he only had a few basic practice spells, which weren't very useful on the battlefield. However, this did have its advantages. He could cast the same spell faster than others, a life-saving advantage. Psyche added, "If you're interested, you could learn Tony's iron shirt. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too conspicuous if you were the only one in the army who didn't turn black?" Frederick asked flatteringly, "It seems a bit awkward for me to turn black. Can I try a different color?" Psyche rolled her eyes at him and said, "How about pink?" Chapter 221, Magic for Combat. Spring arrived, and the weather warmed up. In the blink of an eye, the earth transformed from white to vibrant green. Dawn, having nearly mastered hibernation this winter, was now out and about as soon as the weather warmed. However, This estate was new to Frederick, and unlike back in Wesson, the people here were unfamiliar with both him and Dawn. Dawn's desire to play with the children led to a flurry of stories of older brothers and sisters protecting their frightened siblings. The sea ice melted, and merchants began setting sail. After a winter of preparation, the Dawn Chamber of Commerce officially launched ship and cargo insurance services on several routes. With Frederick's financial backing, many began choosing to insure there. Soon after, a fleet from Wesson arrived in Hammer. In addition to the wireless communications team led by Professor Heinrich, they also brought 2 newly manufactured 50-horsepower steam tractors. In the days that followed, many flocked to Frederick's estate to watch the 2 tractors in action. This simply scaled up and appropriately optimized tractor could pull a 2 plowshare for deep plowing at a speed much faster than a horse. It could also power water pumps, steel mills, and saws. Someone inquired about the price, but it turned out to be too expensive to buy. Frederick, unconcerned, offered to rent it. As the saying goes, some come, some leave. Professor Adam, radiating a certain charisma, chartered nearly 10 ships with an investment delegation for a trip to Wesson. The fleet grew even larger as they passed through Cologne. With his work arranged, Frederick could focus on studying magic with Psyche. One day, as he entered his study, he felt as if he had suddenly lost over 20 pounds, his steps seeming to float. What's going on? Frederick paused. Are we on the moon? Anti-gravity magic. Psyche, sitting on the sofa, raised a metal feather from a winged hussar and shook it. Frederick sighed. So that's how it is. This is a must-learn magic for losing weight. Just as he finished speaking, he suddenly felt a sinking sensation, as if he were carrying a fat man weighing hundreds of kilograms. Is this a magic that increases gravity? He immediately thought of what was going on. It could be like this. This magic was incredibly powerful. If used while striking someone, it would be incredibly effective. Psyche dispelled the spell, made him sit down, and then asked, "You know the nature of gravity, right? It's universal gravitation," Frederick replied. "The essence of universal gravitation is the distortion of space and time." Psyche tossed the metal feather into the air. It first hovered in the air, then fell at a speed that left an afterimage, then slowly rose and fell again, repeating the cycle endlessly. Magical elements exist in every corner of this world, she began to lecture Frederick. These elements resonate under certain circumstances and affect reality. This resonance is magic, Frederick nodded. Psyche has been emphasizing this theory for several years, so she said. In other words, in addition to the magic of gold, wood, water, fire and earth that we can come into contact with in daily life, there are many types of magic that we are not aware of. There are also phenomena, Psyche said. For example, this. After she finished speaking, she glared at the metal feather in front of her, and a red laser shot out of her eyes, vaporizing the end of the feather. Frederick asked her with a frown, "Should I prepare a pair of red panties for you to wear outside?" After a moment, Psyche said nonchalantly, "The anti-gravity magic used by the winged hussars to reduce weight and the summoning magic of Artisha are both branches of space magic. Have you noticed that there is only anti-gravity magic but no magic crystals in the wings of the winged hussars?" Frederick replied, "On the ceiling, indeed. Could it be that the space element does not have the corresponding magic crystals? If this magic is used on a large scale, wouldn't it be possible to create a flying ship?" Psyche nodded, pointed to her head and said, "The magic knowledge my mother stuffed in me includes islands that can float in the sky, teleportation arrays, and other functions. It can also expand space, and there are even storage rings." Frederick's eyes lit up. These are all good things. But Psyche immediately poured cold water on him. Perhaps it's because the world is different. The special elements here are difficult to precisely control. Even I can only control gravity, making teleportation very dangerous, huh? Frederick cried out in disappointment. "Why is this happening?" Psyche spread her hands helplessly, saying, "I don't know. I only know that the special elements are vibrating violently and are difficult to control. So a stable magic crystal hasn't formed, but since I arrived in this world, I've observed that these vibrations have been gradually weakening over the past few hundred years. I speculate that this world experienced some major event many years ago, perhaps related to the legendary Ragnarok. Alice, such things are too far away for you. If I find any new conclusions, I'll burn them for you." Frederick's mouth twitched. This kind of cutting-edge research seemed too far away for him. Psyche reached out and flicked her fingers. Frederick sat back on the sofa, feeling exactly the same as when he was hanging upside down. I will first teach you the magic of controlling gravity. Psyche let the feather fly to Frederick by itself, for no other reason than that this magic can save your life at a critical moment. Frederick took the feather and nodded seriously. Psyche asked, "Take a look at the magic circle above. Do you see any problems?" Frederick examined it carefully. With his current basic knowledge of magic, he quickly saw the problem and said, "This magic circle is very complex. It only requires an infusion of mental power, and the magic circle actually automatically captures special elements and takes effect." Psyche said, "Yes, it's a magic circle designed for people who don't know magic. You can see that its components are very sophisticated, taking into account the low processing precision and poor material quality. Even if there are slight errors, there will be no problems. From a practical point of view, it is close to perfect, just right for you to get started." Frederick continued to observe the magic circle and asked curiously, "Did you design this magic circle?" "No," Psyche shook her head. "It existed before I came here. It's one of the ancient magic spells collected by the Witch Sisterhood. Later, someone married into the royal family of the Pest Kingdom and took it with them. There's a useless part in the magic circle, right in the middle. I suspect it's a trademark or signature. It can be optimized during use." Frederick saw the logo and asked, "Isn't this the logo of the Witch Sisterhood?" Psyche replied, "The Witch Sisterhood uses this as their symbol. That's not the point. You should slowly study the magic." Frederick began to carefully study the reaction force of the magic circle, then manipulated the surrounding special elements, constructing it bit by bit above his palm. Psyche prepared a scale with identical weights on each side for him to test. By the second day of Frederick's practice, the scale could tilt slightly, though it took nearly half an hour to prepare. "You've gotten the hang of it." Psyche looked satisfied. "The next step is practice makes perfect," Frederick said with a bitter face. "This magic circle looks simple, but it's difficult to operate." Psyche said, "It's a problem with this special element. You can only rely on yourself to figure out how to speed up the casting. Practice more." Frederick nodded, understanding that there were no shortcuts. Psyche handed him a chart and said, "This is the first phase of your study plan. Take a look and see if there are any adjustments you need to make, based on your current habits." Frederick took the chart and began to study it. Psyche's plan focused on ice, fire, and lightning, encompassing offense, defense, and control, all of which are commonly used on the battlefield. "I think it's fine," Frederick said, "but it's going to take a long time to learn." Psyche replied, "It depends on how fast you learn. If you're the protagonist of a fantastic novel, you could master it in a day." Chapter 222, Another Wonder. 1 hammer, 2 hammers, 3 hammers. The manor needed a fence repair, giving Frederick a chance to put his skills to use. Psyche had him hammering stakes. He used anti-gravity when lifting the hammer, and increased gravity when it dropped. But that wasn't all. He had to count his strikes, counting from 1 to 10, and between 2 and 8, he wore a suit of ice armor. Odd hammers were enchanted with fire, and even hammers with lightning. Everyone in the manor knew by now that the master and Dawn were easy to deal with. Just don't mess with that pretty brown-haired teacher. She bullied the master, forcing him to hammer stakes in the scorching heat. He had just finished his day's work when Christian arrived with a middle-aged man with a slightly high hairline. Christian quietly gestured to his superiors, telling them he was there to solicit sponsorship. After a quick shower, Frederick met the middle-aged man, named Bohard, in the living room. "Observatory." Frederick paused, raising his teacup. "Is there an observatory in Hama?" Bohard answered a little embarrassedly, "Yes, but our observatory is too small. Recently, the lights in the city have been too bright, seriously affecting our work, so we plan to build a new observatory outside the city." Frederick understood. Hama City had imported a lot of magic streetlights in the past 2 years. These things are on all night long. The current telescope technology is not good enough, so they are suffering from light pollution. He took a sip of tea slowly, then said, "How about moving to Wessenland State? We have a mountainous area there that will be covered with pine forests in the future. Except for forest fires, there will be no light pollution for a long time in the future." Bohard drank his tea in silence. He just wanted to move the observatory outside the city and had never thought of moving so far. Seeing his reaction, Frederick continued, "I have a plan to standardize time. You've heard about the city's radio broadcasts lately, right? I'm planning to have the observatory announce the daily time. To do this, I'm planning to build a radio tower for the observatory. Then, Whether in the North Sea or the Inland Sea, every radio station will be able to hear the current time. Frederick was already quite adept at this kind of deception, drawing a large scallion pancake, and Bohard was stunned by his plan. However, Frederick's ambitions didn't stop there. He wanted to grasp something else, the prime meridian. Everyone now knew that the Earth was a sphere, but currently, only Psyche was thought to have been able to circumnavigate the globe. The dangers of the sea were beyond imagination. Whether you were a god of magic or a sword master, if you lost your ship in the vast ocean, you would still drown. A problem arose during the promotion of the maritime positioning system. There was no unified standard for longitude and latitude, so when you got a nautical chart, you had to first determine which locations longitude and latitude were used. Latitude is measured by observing the stars in the sky. There's no North Star here, and different locations use different stars, resulting in different values. Longitude is even more complex. It's determined by calculating the time difference between noon and two locations. This requires a prime meridian, which currently varies from country to country. Frederick now intends to leverage the promotion of the positioning system to develop his own system of longitude and latitude, while also creating new nautical charts. This requires precise clocks and an observatory to determine the time of noon. Precise clocks already existed in Wesson during this era. Frederick's invention of a lever escapement replaced the existing crankshaft escapement. Professor Elmite developed steel suitable for springs. Combined with the use of vernier calipers and specialized gear-making lathes, clocks achieved significant improvements in accuracy and reduced size. However, the price of these clocks remained relatively low. After all, when Frederick was born in his previous life, the 3 turns and 1 ring still had a watch. For a long time, clocks and pocket watches, still under development, were considered luxuries here. But ship owners had plenty of money. A precise marine clock capable of calculating latitude was much cheaper than a ship struck by a reef due to inaccurate positioning. So, all Frederick needed was an observatory. Shortly after the spring plowing season began, local gangs robbed a passerby 2 blocks from the Hammer Observatory one evening. A passing Wesson soldier intervened and the robbers fled. The soldier, unfamiliar with the streets and the darkness, failed to catch up. Frederick later learned of this incident and provided a low-interest loan to Hammer for a lighting project. The brighter streets improved public security, though the streetlights around the observatory were brighter than elsewhere. For a time, Hammer became known as the city that never sleeps, and the nighttime market flourished, driving a significant nighttime economy. Recently, several young men from the observatory urged Bernhardt to move the observatory to a less lit area. If they lacked funds, they could try to contact Duke Wesson. Each of these men had an acceptance letter from the University of Wessenberg, signed by the rector himself. Unaware of the intricacies behind this, Bohard said with some embarrassment, "I greatly admire Duke Wesson's ambition, but building a new observatory would be a huge investment. I've also heard that a radio tower is incredibly expensive, and I'm afraid it'll be hard to get a return on that investment." 20,000 florins. Frederick held up 2 fingers. "I'll invest this much over 3 years to build a new observatory. The Wesson state government will cover future operations and new investments. All staff salaries will triple, housing will be provided free, and the children of regular employees will enjoy the same education as Wesson state children. The best glass production in the entire Rhine Confederation is in the cities of Wessenberg and Nuremberg and Wesson. There are also skilled lens grinders for microscopes there, allowing for larger and better telescopes." Bohard's eyes widened. This offer was beyond his wildest dreams. For one thing, observatories across the country were all privately funded. Without sponsorship, everyone was left starving. Frederick, on the other hand, promised government funding, instantly securing jobs and a guaranteed livelihood. Bohard was tempted. Besides the salary, there was also the glass production area and lens grinders Frederick had mentioned. Perhaps he could make an even better telescope. Seeing his interest, Frederick made the final move. "I wrote the book The Nature of Light. I have an idea for a new astronomical telescope, but I don't have the time to manage it myself. I'm looking for someone with experience to lead it." "What kind of telescope?" Bohard asked excitedly. Astronomers, part of the academic community, were more convinced than others that Frederick was possessed by an angel, or else he was a demon. Frederick had played astronomy with friends in his previous life, so drawing a reflecting telescope was no problem. Bohard didn't understand it at first, but after Frederick's detailed explanation, he felt it made perfect sense. "I'll think about it," Bohard said hesitantly. I'll discuss it with the others and see if they agree. Don't worry, I won't leak the telescope plan. Frederick smiled and replied, that's okay. I'll wait for your good news. After Borhard left, Frederick smiled. His intensive efforts to build the observatory, establish Wesson time, and establish the prime meridian weren't simply driven by economic considerations. He saw the observatory and subsequent projects as wonders, much like the German cathedral and the Edelweiss library. Wonders can significantly enhance a territory's visibility and prestige, letting distant lands know of its significance and gradually cultivating a sense of its power. This is how soft power gradually builds. If Frederick secured the observatory, he would have the wonders of German cathedral plus faith, the Edelweiss library plus culture, and the observatory plus navigation. There were many more wonders to come. Chapter 223 Practicing the Ultimate Skill. I've noticed there's something missing from this world. What is it? A bikini. Get lost. Psyche delivered a powerful kick to Frederick's gluteus maximus, followed by a flurry of kicks that sent him floating in the air for 10 seconds. After all, they were the only two people on this small island. Bernhard had agreed to move the observatory to Wesson, and the massive investment had sparked ulterior motives in many people. While there were no PowerPoint presentations these days, paper projects were a well-established way to scam people out of money. For example, someone claimed to be building a 500-meter tall building, while another was planning a 100,000-ton wooden ship. Two people, claiming to be weavers, even arrived, claiming they could weave the most beautiful fabric ever seen. Not only were the colors and patterns incredibly beautiful, but the resulting garments also possessed a strange property: they were invisible to anyone who was incompetent or hopelessly stupid. Frederick couldn't stand these people, and except for supporting a few struggling painters, he drove away all those who had swindled his money. He then fled to an island where wealthy people vacationed to study magic. Stop pretending to be dead. Psyche poked a salty fish on the beach with her toe. Study your magic hard. When you're rich, you can wear a bikini and no one will say anything. Frederick rolled his eyes like a salty fish. The fun was over, and they got back to business. Today, they were going to practice their special moves while surrounded by the ocean. Psyche pointed at the sea and said, let's do the most powerful one. Frederick shook his head with a bitter face and said, theoretically, the most powerful one would kill me. Psyche touched his head, and a dazzling light shield enveloped Frederick. Frederick felt his defenses increase, and without a word, he launched into his ultimate move. A few dozen meters away, two halos, 4 or 5 meters in diameter and 1 meter thick, appeared on the sea. Very well, Psyche praised. Your control of magical elements has reached the level of a fine magician. Frederick was concentrating on accelerating the light element. Following Psyche's instructions, he only used 80% of his strength, leaving 20% for unexpected situations. He managed to say, it's just simple control. Half a minute later, the light elements in the two counter-accelerating circles of light reached their maximum speed and quickly overlapped. A flash of white light, brighter than the sun, appeared on the sea surface. The shockwave seemed to have scooped away a large chunk of the sea. The reefs on the seabed could be seen shattered instantly, and countless seafood flew into the air. Frederick himself was blown away by the shockwave, rolling on the ground for a dozen times, but he was unharmed. Psyche remained where she was, her long brown hair and snow-white skirt slightly blown up. After Frederick passed by, he said angrily, I thought I wouldn't be blown away. Psyche said seriously, this is force dissipation, a defensive method that reduces damage when facing a powerful attack. You should learn more about it. Frederick frowned, feeling she was taking revenge. Psyche began to critique his magic. It's grand but not refined. The utilization of elements is so low that I can't even describe it. It's pure sheer force. What you need to do next is find a way to improve utilization and reduce energy consumption and time. Frederick sat on the beach, not asking Psyche what to do, but pondering her findings. The explosion is caused by the high-speed collision of elements, he said, pinching his chin. The speed was very slow, and then it was increased. Would it be more effective if the elements were more compact? He immediately began to condense a ring-sized ring of light element on his hand, then tried to compress it even more. As if he had made a new discovery, he immediately replaced the light element with fire. The purity has increased significantly. Frederick looked up at Psyche. Could it be that compression increases purity? How could that be? Psyche simply replied, why can't elements be soft-packed? Frederick frowned, unsure how to approach this problem. He decided to wait and see if he could exploit the phenomenon. He believed this explosion was the result of the rapid release of energy from the magical elements after they collided. If the energy density of the elements could be increased, more energy could be released. He just didn't know if this would increase the proportion of magical elements involved in the energy release. He cast 2 identical auras at the same location as the first spell, compressing them much finer during the acceleration process. After a few minutes, he concentrated all his energy on merging the counter-rotating auras, unaware that Psyche had escaped. When Frederick awoke, he found himself lying on the beach, the water up to his feet, with Psyche sitting beside him. "Why did I faint?" he asked, sitting up. "Has the power increased that much?" Psyche said calmly, "I have good news for you. From now on, you'll have the chance to perish alongside everyone below the rank of magic god and sword saint." Frederick searched his brain and asked, "There must be some bad news, right?" Psyche nodded. "The house on the island is gone. You'll have to pay for it. The boat is gone too. You'll have to swim back." Frederick blinked and looked back. The small building in the center of the island a few hundred meters away was gone. Several trees planted nearby were broken, and the dock to the right for small boats was empty. No, he noticed. The trees had fallen towards him, and the dock was to his left. "Nothing's wrong," Psyche said. "You got blown up on your own." Frederick blinked, sighed, and said, "It's over. We're stranded on a deserted island, it's just you." Psyche rolled her eyes. "I can fly." Frederick was speechless. If he had brought one with him, he'd surely be having fun with the children at the manor. He rubbed his head again and asked, "Why is it so powerful this time?" Psyche replied, "Think of it as a chain reaction. When the elements are compressed, the energy released at one point causes the surrounding elements to release some energy. This continues layer by layer until the remaining energy is insufficient to allow the surrounding elements to release energy." Frederick nodded, understanding a little. Psyche continued, "In theory, a 100% reaction is possible, but in practice it's impossible because the force of the explosion would scatter the magical elements, preventing them from participating in the reaction." Frederick thought for a moment and asked, "What if we can somehow confine these magical elements to participate in the reaction?" "Then you have to implement that method first," Psyche said. "In theory, there are many ways, but in practice, it's very difficult." Frederick thought for a moment. Then said, "Then I'll continue to study small-scale magic and try to throw it out. Otherwise, its power won't be fully realized." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224, Brush Up Your Reputation. The fishermen of Hanma City were in luck today. The fish that had been killed or knocked unconscious by the explosion were floating on the sea, making them easy to catch. Frederick and his friends were able to catch a ride back home. The owner of the holiday house on the island didn't dare ask for too much compensation, especially after hearing that the house was accidentally blown up while they were practicing magic. They only cautiously charged the cost price. There were still many people in the manor who wanted to cheat them out of money, so Frederick continued to disappear. No one knew where the two of them had gone, but they had wireless communicators with them, so they could be found if something happened. In fact, Frederick didn't know where he was now. He woke up one day to find an unfamiliar ceiling in front of him, as if he was in a hunter's cabin in the dense forest. Psyche only left him a few crude pieces of armor, a dagger, a spear, a first aid kit, and a task to hunt a bear spirit, asking him to kill monsters and gain combat experience. Frederick curled his lips. The bear monster Psyche was talking about was a somewhat humanoid bear monster. Adults stood about 1.4 meters tall, their claws capable of wielding clubs, rocks, and other objects to attack. They could go berserk, and their intelligence was roughly on par with Dawn. If they continued to evolve, they might even become a bear mother. The problem was, bear monsters lived in groups of 20 or 30, never alone. Killing one would swarm in droves. While this mission might seem like a one-on-one fight, it was actually Frederick taking on a whole group of bear monsters. After understanding the situation, Frederick left the cabin. His priority wasn't to kill monsters, but to survive. Psyche hadn't packed any food. The cabin contained some bottles and cans, and there was a stream nearby, so he had pheasant soup for dinner. The next morning, after finishing off the leftover soup, He began walking downstream along the stream, searching for bear monster tracks. His method worked. At noon on the third day, he discovered a patch of bear tracks on the upper bank of the stream. Judging by the number of tracks, they were from bear monsters, not bears. Frederick cautiously followed a bear's tracks, unaware he was upwind. After walking for a while, he spotted 3 bears ahead, seemingly waiting for him with wooden clubs. One of them held what looked like a carriage axle, complete with bearings. With their intelligence, the bears recognized the weapon-wielding hairless, bipedal apes as enemies and charged forward with a roar. Their roars were echoed by the forest behind them. Frederick quickly jumped aside. Having been repeatedly assaulted by groups during his training, he knew better than to stand there in the middle. He had to jump to the side to ensure there were only a few enemies in front of him. Now he and the 3 bears were almost aligned, and his lightning-tipped spear pierced the shoulder of the closest bear. The bear's fur was tough, and the spear only penetrated slightly, but the electricity that passed through its body was enough to stop its heart. Frederick was afraid to let it bleed too much, as the scent of its own blood would send it into a frenzy. A white light erupted from the second bear's feet, and a massive pillar of ice enveloped it, suffocating it before it vanished. Just then, a wind blade flew from the distant woods, severing half the third bear's head. As Frederick's curse faded, the approaching group of bears erupted in a roar, shaking the earth. A dozen bears, their muscles bulging, rushed forward with a clatter of fury. Some carried stones, some wheels, some carried shafts, and one, the strongest, simply grabbed a half-gnawed horse leg. A swordsman in white cloak and armor charged forward, flitting through the bears like a butterfly. His longsword pierced the throats of 2 bears before being sent flying by a horse's leg. Frederick sighed, unsheathed his enchanted dagger, and hurled it at the strongest bear. The dagger lodged in the bear's back, and the next moment, several icy spikes burst from its body. Frederick, spear in hand, prowled the bear's perimeter, stabbing those close by with his spear and hurling fireballs at those farther away. These beasts, with their limited intelligence, could only charge, and he eventually dispatched them one by one with his kite-like movements. Frederick returned to the scene and found a forest path. A luxurious carriage had overturned. The sturdy carriage was intact, and the people inside were still alive, but the 2 horses and the driver had been eaten to the last drop. The white-clad swordsman, who had been sent flying, hadn't woken up yet. Frederick dragged her to the carriage, said a word to the people inside, and left. After catching a rabbit for dinner, Frederick returned to the cabin and found an updated quest. The reward for hunting the bear was a small bag of salt. There was a map on the table, and the next quest was to eliminate a wolf pack outside a village 10 kilometers away before nightfall tomorrow. Frederick was speechless. He stewed the rabbit early, ate it, and went to sleep, as he had to wake up early the next day. Similar missions continued to unfold, and Frederick finally understood his current position. He was south of the city of Bowling. Last year, Casimir had completely annihilated the noble coalition, resulting in the deaths of numerous warriors and young men from various villages, leaving these areas without the manpower to combat the monsters. The struggle for survival between monsters, wild beasts, and humans would not end. With the humans weakened, the others began to gradually treat farmland and pastures as their own canteens, waiting on the roads for food to be delivered. As for the local lords, they had almost all been killed by the pests. Many families were embroiled in air struggles, and some had died out altogether. With no time to attend to these matters, the farmers were left to suffer. Frederick had been hunting monsters in the area for a month when he woke one day to find himself being carried back to his estate. It was August 1028, and the coalition forces defending the Elbe were preparing to retreat. With both the Danmar and Piast kingdoms crippled, and signs of civil unrest east of the Elbe, no one would venture west. Good news also came from Wesson. The Carolina Canal had been dug theoretically, and they were just waiting for the Duke of Wesson to return to preside over the digging ceremony. Frederick began to arrange his return trip. This time he would take a boat upstream and finally return to Wesson by land. The reason was simple. It was to show off the military might of Wesson to the nobles along the way and increase its visibility. Just as Frederick was about to leave, a soldier from the magician company brought 2 middle-aged men. The 2 men looked a little haggard. The weather was still quite hot, but they were only wearing a pair of underwear inside and a bearskin coat outside. The soldier turned out to be a student of the University of Wessenberg. He told Frederick that the two were professors of the Royal University of Constantine and were good friends with Professor Ahmed. Chapter 225, Recruiting People. 1028, the Wesson army arrived near Nuremberg by land and then boarded ships to sail back upriver. A crowd gathered outside the city's harbor to greet them. Frederick stood by the ship's side with the others, waving to the crowd on shore. Suddenly, his face darkened. The clothing of the Wesson canton had begun to resemble suits, incorporating traditional styles into embellished suits suitable for young men, though the colors and patterns were simpler and brighter. However, among the crowd, one group wore ancient silk and colorful garments. The fabric was all fine silk from Sardinia, with intricate and exquisite embroidery. As if to prevent others from noticing their multiple layers, the sleeves, collars, and fronts revealed layers of clothing, each a different color. Beyond the clothes, each of them wore a dazzling array of gold chains around their necks and rings on their fingers. Frederick thought, this is it, what's wrong with Manuel, Ahmed, and the others? Is the reputation of the University of Wessenberg still a thing? He soon understood what was going on. They were there to greet Manolz and Fritz, two old colleagues. Manolz and Fritz had been spotted in Hammer by former students of the Royal University and had met Frederick. Frederick treated them to a feast and invited them back to Wesson. However, once they disembarked, they were dazzled by the malicious display of wealth displayed by the group. Manolz asked All Might, how much money did you scam from Duke Wesson? How can you sleep at night? All Might replied with a chuckle, this isn't the place to talk. Let's go to my house and talk. I've got a homemade meal ready. Manolz and he were old friends, so he didn't hesitate. Sorry to bother you for a few days, let's go, All Might said proudly. The car is over there. Manolz and Fritz were stunned when they saw the car. Fritz asked All Might, is this your new magic puppet? All Might replied modestly, it was invented by the principal. Schmidt made it. I'm just helping out. Meanwhile, Frederick, not far away, was equally bewildered. He groaned. These guys were using a 20-horsepower tractor to pull a carriage. This was his private car. Alfu was already waiting nearby and opened the door for the master. Frederick stepped into the carriage. The interior was about the same size as a van, but a little more spacious than a carriage. Welcome home, Maria was in the carriage, beaming at Frederick. Frederick sat down beside her, scooped her up and rubbed his cheek against hers. Maria's cheeks instantly turned the color of an apple. That's annoying. Maria was still just a child. Sister Psyche will laugh at me. Psyche sat down across from them and said nonchalantly, you can just pretend I don't exist. Just then, Alfu entered and began to report to Frederick on the recent developments in the territory. Elsewhere, at All Might's home, Manolz looked at the sumptuous dinner before him and exclaimed, this is magnificent. Fritz also said, we're so sorry to spend so much. On the table lay a roasted whole ox, an apple in its mouth, cherries where its eyes should be. Surrounding it were a circle of fresh vegetables, several of which they had never seen before. They must have been quite expensive. Manuel smiled and said to them, don't underestimate All Might. He's the richest of those of us who came here from Constantinople. The second richest is BASF. You wouldn't believe it. Manolz smiled and said, Sage. Don't be ridiculous. You're talking about BASF, the one who fell after stepping on a slime. How could he be richer than you? Fritz nodded in agreement. Manuel was a powerful necromancer and currently the vice-chancellor of the university. How could his annual salary be lower than that of a fool? All Might said to the two of them, don't underestimate the vice-chancellor. It's still unclear who will be second between him and BASF. This put the two of them in a difficult position. All right, Diesel said. Everyone, please take your seats. I'm the poorest one right now, Julius said. Yeah, I haven't had meat in days. If we don't start feasting soon, I'll starve to death. After everyone was seated, All Might's wife began serving food. All Might said, don't listen to Diesel and Julius. They enjoy the personal protection of Lord Richardnell's personal disciples. We don't have that kind of treatment, Manolz asked in surprise. How did you trick Duke Wesson? Fritz said, All Might can use the golem puppet to trick Duke Wesson, but what about the others? Teach me. Everyone laughed, leaving them both baffled. All Might and Manolz had a good relationship. Manolz was an alchemist specializing in steel, and they had collaborated extensively in the past. We all make money with our own abilities, All Might said while eating. I'm the Minister of Industry in the territory. I work with the principal to produce elemental metals, machine tools, calculators, etc., and the annual dividends are very high. BASF is now producing slime glue, and the dividends are almost catching up with me. Vice Principal Manuel is now selling milk, condensed soup, canned food, etc., and the business is very good. Matthias and Manafro are the Minister and Deputy Minister of Agriculture. One of them sells magic-enhanced fine breeds, and the other breeds livestock and sells seedlings and feed, and they make a lot of money. Friedrich is now making life-saving medicine, but the investment is huge, so the final profit does not seem to be high. Diesel and Julius are working for the army, so I won't say much. All Might talked about the ways for everyone present to make a fortune, and Manuel and Fritz forgot to eat after listening. Manuel continued, let's not waste time on empty talk. The president hopes you can, like us, turn your knowledge into gold here at the University of Wessenberg. Manuel thought for a moment and said, I'm researching rust-proof steel. It requires a significant investment, and I don't know when I'll succeed. Ahmet raised his glass to him and said, I'm the Minister of Industry, and I'm in charge of steel making. I can guarantee funding for your experiments, and if you succeed, you'll share in the profits, just like we do. Manuel also raised his glass and said, if you're willing to become a professor at the University of Wessenberg, you'll get a house like Ahmet's. If you become the dean of a college with an annual salary of 300 florins, we can bring your family over. Manuel pondered for about 10 minutes before finally raising his glass and toasting with everyone. These scholars weren't detached from the mundane world. Many studied to achieve a better life. But after traveling east, they returned with their university gone and nowhere to live, so it didn't matter who they worked for. Besides, they have a lot of acquaintances here. All Might is an official here, so Diesel and Julius must have authority over the military, making things easier. After everyone put down their glasses, Fritz quipped, Alice, I chose the wrong path back then. Otherwise, I could have made a fortune. Unlike now, I doubt Duke Wesson would have me make artificial urine to drown the enemy. His research was somewhat off track, and his various attempts resulted in intermediate and final products that smelled of urine when dissolved in water, earning him the nickname Urine Alchemist. At this time, Matthias said to him seriously, Fritz, we have talked to the principal about your research results. I sent someone to Constantinople to find your family and ask for some of the white crystals you left behind to conduct experiments according to the principal's conjecture. I haven't reported the experimental results yet, but it has met the principal's expectations. According to the principal's habit, he will definitely cooperate with you to build a factory. Really? Fritz asked doubtfully. What's the use of that thing? Matthias replied, fertilizer. It is a very useful fertilizer. Fritz shook his head and said with a smile, I heard on the ship that you can enhance seeds and increase yields, so why do you still need that little fertilizer? Of course not. Matthias became serious. People need to eat, and plants also need to eat. Neither people nor plants can eat magical elements as food. I used your sample for experiments. The yield of wheat can increase by more than 20%, the yield of golden beans can increase by about 10%, and the yield of some vegetables can increase by almost 30%. Fritz shouted in surprise. So much? His mind was a little confused. He had never thought of using his results for planting before, but tried to use it as poison. Alma then said to him, I can arrange for you to set up a set of alchemical equipment. You can make some more and give it to Matthias for experiments as soon as they're ready. If it's successful, we can start building a factory. Fritz, unsure himself, said, okay, I'll give it a try. Can you lend me some money for startup capital? But it's getting cold now, so we'll have to wait until next year to plant plants. As he finished speaking, everyone laughed. Manuel said to him, come to our school first. We have an emergency fund and can allocate some money for your experiments. Matthias continued, don't worry about the planting experiments. We can grow vegetables here in winter. I'll set up a couple of greenhouses specifically for you tomorrow. Come with me to see them. Fritz understood Manuel's point, but didn't understand the situation. All right, he finally said, I'll take a position at the school and get paid. Then everyone raised their glasses. The conversation that followed was much more relaxed. Someone asked them, I heard you were in such a bad state when you arrived in Hammer. What happened? Fritz said gloomily, well, last year, Crown Prince Casimir of the Pest Kingdom suffered a crushing defeat. This year, he went to rob the ants in the east, and we fled in a hurry. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.